Good evening. Welcome to the RSU 5 Board of Directors meeting. It is Wednesday, April 28th, 2021, and we are here at the Freeport High School with a full board, and Liam is our student rep for the evening. So we will get started with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So do we have a motion for consideration and approval of the minutes from the April 14, 2021 meeting as presented, barring any errors or omissions? Lindsay and Susanna, thank you. All those in favor? Great, none opposed. Adjustments to the agenda.
Yes, I have a few. We need to add to 15B, consideration and approval to employ a technology integration teacher at Freeport High School for the 21-22 school year. And then for 15C, consideration and approval to employ a classroom teacher at MSS for the 21-22 school year. And then I would request that we move the enrollment report up to right after these adjustments, because we have our consultant online with us, and I'd like to move her up so she doesn't need to sit through our whole meeting.
Okay, all right. All right, so Maura, she moved up to a panelist. Great. Do you want to do a quick intro?
So this will be Karen DeLuke from the New England School Development Council here tonight via Zoom to go over the enrollment study that they have completed for RSU 5. In reviewing this study, I have also asked her to do a follow-up report following this meeting that will look at overall enrollment projections by school. The follow-up report, because of sample size, will not be broken down by grade level, but just by school population per school. And this will be a 5-year projection that she will do for us and then send it to me later on. So thank you, Karen, for all of your work on this report and for being here tonight to review your findings. And I will turn it over to you now.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here this evening with you. I'm actually going to share my screen with you so that you can see the PowerPoint projected at the same. Oh, it's disabled. The host has disabled participant screen sharing.
Hold on just a sec. We'll get that squared away for you.
Thank you. So I'm actually going to begin because it's just, I'll do the introduction first and then we'll get to the PowerPoint. By way of backup, NESDEC is a not-for-profit. It is over 70 years old. It has served the New England states for all of those years, and there are over 300 districts who contract with NESDEC to do multiple services. Executive searches, we do facilities planning, demographies, and enrollment projections. The enrollment projections is what we're discussing tonight for RSU 5, legal services, and some professional development. Today, we're going to talk about the process we use to do enrollment projections. It's a modified cohort survival rate, and I just want to briefly go over the process so that you understand the data that we use, and then I'll go over the data with you. We review 10 years of historical enrollment data from RSU 5 across all of the towns that you have there. We determine the percentage of increase or decrease over those years, and we look at ratios that will tell us between, say, kindergarten and first grade, how many students did you retain or lose over those 10 years, and look at it objectively from those percentages. We then choose ratios for each grade level, so that it's not just a typical, sometimes you'll see a 1 cohort survival rate, 2-year, 3-year. We actually look at ratios over the 10 years. And we look at future growth patterns, and that's how we predict the enrollment projections. As you can imagine, the most reliable enrollment projections are those students who are currently enrolled in your district. We also look at something called the grades 1 through 7 cohort survival. So we're looking to make sure those are the most years where students stay within a district. And we look for 1 year, so for 2019-20, we looked at your grades 1 through 7. And for 2020-21, we looked at grades 2 through 8 and looked over the past 10 years at how many students move in, how many students move out. And you average about 3 students who move out over those 10 years per year. It varies across the 8 years, but it's important to keep that in perspective. Once students are at RSU 5, they stay. So that's important to know. The second level of reliability is those students who are already born, and we'll talk about those in a minute. And then the third level of reliability is those students who have not yet to be born, and we actually estimate those births, which I will show you in just a minute. So I'm hoping I can share my screen. And here we are. Look at that. Isn't technology wonderful? I want you to all know that all of us at NESDAQ are former educators. I'm a former educator, but also a central office employee. So I've been involved in doing enrollment projections and thinking about how to staff and working with facilities across all sorts of schools in multiple districts in the state of Massachusetts. So first, I'm going to take you through the historical enrollment. And just looking at the chart, this is historical enrollment by grade. In the upper left-hand corner, you'll see on the top chart is the birth year. Those are the historic births up to date. So from 2005 to 2015, we always use 10 years of historical data. You'll see the average of those births over those 10 years is about 129 per year. And then you'll see the school year, and then the grades across the top. And you can actually trace, if you look at the top line, the 143 kindergartners as they progress through the district diagonally. Here, we'll think about how you can then look overall pre-K to 12 at RSU 5. And over the past 10 years, you've had 65 students enter from 2010 to 2020. So you're still seeing some of the increases in enrollments over the past 10 years. I want you to then look at the bottom left chart, the historical enrollment and grade combinations. These are important, and I recognize you have different schools with different grade combinations. We chose these so that they could target those grade levels. So for pre-K to 2, you can see you've had an increase over the past 10 years at that grade span. 3 to 5, there's been a decrease. 6 to 8, an increase, and 9 to 12, a significant increase of 114 students since 2010 to 2020. The chart on the lower right is the historical percentage of change per year. You've actually seen an increase of 65 students on average over the past 10 years. So you're a district that is seeing some stability, but also an in-migration of students, either through the residents that you have or students moving in. This next chart shows you just a bar chart to see the fluidity of the enrollment, but also to see that over these 10 years, you have sort of maintained your enrollments. So now let's get to the projected enrollments. This is the same chart, the same format as the historical. And what we're doing here is in the upper left-hand corner of the top chart, you're seeing the birth year. Now, the first 5, those children have been born. But for grades 6 through 10, you're seeing an estimated birth rate. These are the students that we don't know, so we're projecting and thinking about patterns we have seen in the births, which are reported by the state of Maine, but also through the US Census. And you're averaging 132 births, so it increased by 3. So you're seeing people moving in and people having children and wanting to attend school here. You can also see the enrollment projections by grade, and I want to draw your attention to the kindergarten number of 137, and move your eyes to the right and you'll see as seniors, the 12th graders, you're graduating 145, a large class for the 11th grade. But there's a balance, and that's important, that you have as many students coming in as you are graduating in most cases, and that's a factor to consider. When you look at the projected enrollments in grade combinations, due to the fluidity of the COVID enrollments, we are suggesting to all of our affiliates that they look at only the next 3 years of data for the projected enrollments to be the most representative of what our best estimation of the enrollments are to date. I believe that there will be some students coming back that have now decided to either do private or parochial school or go to homeschool, so that some of these numbers may increase additionally. But we see over the next 3 years in the bottom left corner chart for pre-K to 2, an increase over the next 3 years of 74 students. In grades 3 through 5, an increase of 49 students. A decrease at grades 6 through 8 of 34 students, and through 9 through 12 of minus 24 students. And you can see as students progress through the grades, when you take that number over time, it makes sense that there should be some negative numbers there. In the bottom right-hand corner, you're seeing positive trends, except for 22-23, where minus 8 students are projected to leave the district, but that's K to 12. So I think it's important to keep that in perspective. Dr. Foley mentioned at the outset that this is these are district projected enrollments, and that she will then contract with NESDEC to do a school by total enrollment in the next few days. Okay, you can see another bar chart for those who like to see the way that looks, and you're seeing an upward trend from 2020 to 2030. This chart is extremely helpful to see the stable environment in RSU 5 from the historical and projected enrollment, and to see that uptick at the end of this next decade. Here it's important to note, this is the birth to kindergarten relationship. These are your future students, and we're thrilled to have them come into our districts. But you can see that the green rectangles are the current K enrollment, and then the sort of turquoise diamond shape is the births. Of note to us is that your K enrollment exceeds the births in a number of years, especially the last 4 or 5. So what that tells us is that people are moving to your district in order to attend your schools. And that speaks highly of the education that students are receiving. And then there's some additional data. I think it's important to note that we track the building permits that have been issued, but it's the Housing and Urban Development and the current building department that reports to HUD that tells us all of this data. And you can see over the past 5 years, you've had a range of 60 single-family home building permits and a few multifamilies. The way we take that into consideration is we only consider those that have been reported to HUD, or if we had contacted the planning department, and that's a separate study, that we would then make sure that these have already been approved. And that's the only way we would consider them. When we look at these numbers, we look back at the enrollments over the past 5 years where they've been in the 60s, and we see that the enrollments have been steady. So these building permits, while one may think that in the 60s that seems excessive, have not had what we determine to be an excessive impact on the enrollment. So I just wanted to make sure you understood that we do track them and we do keep it in perspective. Oh, excuse me. The enrollment history is there for career and tech ed and non-public. The rest of this data is self-reported, and in the state of Maine, it's reported differently. So we use this chart for all of our affiliates across the 6 New England states. But important to note, in the lower left-hand corner, there are 142 K-12 homeschooled students. Some of those students will remain homeschooled in the fall, but some will be coming back, and that will have an impact to the district. And Dr. Foley did share with me a chart which outlines all of the students who are in sort of the outside placements for public, private, religious, and charter schools. And I think you can see the charter school number is there in the second box. But those variables are all taken into consideration, as well as past history, when we look at the enrollment projections. And we all know that the census makes a big difference. There's changes in the pre-K to 12 enrollments, but what we did see yesterday was the census was released preliminarily, and that there are some changes, positive changes for the state of Maine, but we won't know that. But that most districts, not RSU 5, are seeing that decline. We see the impact in births has had a positive trend for RSU 5. So that's the whole big picture of the enrollment projections, and I certainly can take any questions that you would like.
Thank you, Karen. Any board members have questions on the data, or? I'll definitely be interested to see what the school by school piece, I certainly understand that the goal of starting at the district level. I'm curious, some of the statistics over, what ours look like over the last 10 years and sort of the birth to the kindergarten rate, that difference did strike me. And I appreciate you touching upon that about people moving in here for our schools. Or the chart before that, historical and projected, and you said it was pretty stable. I'm curious how our numbers compare to Maine as a state, to the country as a whole. I mean, what would it typically look like if we were looking at, Maine for that same chart? Would it be relatively flat? Would it be a steeper decline?
From the research that I've done, and it's empirical at best because we don't look at the state as a whole, Maine has seen a decline. We've done many projects in the state of Maine, both facilities reviews as well as demographies and enrollment projections. And a lot of your counterparts are seeing a decline in enrollment. Even in the state of Vermont, they're seeing quite a decline in enrollment. The sort of fly in the ointment is that a lot of people left their city dwellings and may have transplanted themselves to vacation homes or pastoral pastures, shall we say, so that there have been some movement in the real estate lens. So it's hard to say what's going to happen in Vermont and Maine over the next year.
And did you say that the real estate sales, and I know you talked about building permits for new construction, but the concept of, increased sales and bringing more people in and more housing, that all gets taken into account in terms of how you're in your methodology on the projections?
The real estate transactions, to the extent we know Maine sort of trends, we look at. We know we actually follow some of the real estate newsletters throughout the New England states. And we know that Maine has seen an increase, but we don't look at it specifically for the Freeport level. That is a separate study, which is a demography. This is just the enrollment projections, but we do keep into perspective that the exodus or the lowering of the population in some of the areas has diminished because people have been moving.
Jeremy.
Just on slide number 7, totally understanding that this is 2020 data that's in there, but in 2021, there is 144 unit housing development expected to go online. And just curious if there's a general number for number of students expected out of a 2-bedroom apartment unit and how that might factor into the future too.
2-bedroom apartments rarely have a lot of children come out of them, but what we have been seeing is in a study we did in Vermont, there was a unit development that went in that people with 1 child would move in. Usually a 2-bedroom is retirees or single or newly coupled people who are looking for a home office. So they have the bedroom in the home office. So we don't usually see too many children come out of that. The difficulty with predicting that is that some of the children might not be school age. So we don't know what percentage that would be. We do know that if somebody does move in with children, it's usually at the elementary level. So it's minimal. If you had 100 units, maybe you'd get 7 to 10 children who are move into those. But that's before COVID and before some of the shifts in real estate. So we're following it closely. Unfortunately, we use the Warren Group for our sort of in-depth understanding of real estate, and they don't cover Maine or Vermont. So we don't have that type of a resource.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, Vali.
Thank you. Thank you so much for presenting this data, and I also look forward to seeing the by school projections. Following up on Jeremy's comment about the permits issued, there are some permits for multi-units that may have 2 units and others may have 144, like the one that he just referred to. How do you account for those very big discrepancies between one permit and another?
The way it's reported to the state would tell us the number of multi-units. Again, it becomes a demography study, which is separate, when we would start to look specifically at what has been permitted and what is under construction. So we just look at what the HUD data tells us to date, and that's what you see there. This will be updated in the fall, and even though you've mentioned to me that there is a 144 unit housing development under construction, until it's reported to HUD, it's not something we take under advisement.
Any other questions? Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I want to commend the central office for their support of all of your educators and families there, and the great collaboration we've had between Dr. Foley and her assistant, Ms. McManus. So thank you very much.
Great, thanks.
Thank you, Karen.
All right. Were we moving anything else?
Yes, I'd like to, since we have our distinguished guest with us.
They obviously haven't been here in a while since you're calling them distinguished.
So I would like to move the establishment of a FHS scholarship up and take that next.
So 14B, we're going to move up in the agenda. So are you going to do an intro, or are they just going to?
I might do an intro here. Here it is. Since the completion of our track and field, Fred Palmer and John Patterson have been looking for a new project to support RSU 5. And so they have been working diligently for the past year on this idea of setting up a new scholarship fund to help our economically disadvantaged students be able to attend college. And so I'm just delighted with how, as always, quickly they work. And they're here to kind of present their idea, and we're hoping to be able to award a couple of these scholarships this year. So I'll turn it over to Fred and John, the dynamic duo.
Welcome, gentlemen. It's been a while. We all know John can go on the fly. It's fine.
That was everything we were going to say. Do I need to keep this on to talk in this microphone? Because I can't really understand you all. It's all muffled. Well, yeah, anyway, Becky got it right. We were two old guys with time on our hands. The track was done, and I got to give, really Fred came up with the idea first, and we did a lot of research on it and talked to a lot of other foundations that had, first of all, we looked at what Freeport had for scholarships, which turns out not very much. There's only slightly more than $100,000 a year in scholarships for the high school kids, which comes out to an average of about $800 per kid one time, enough to buy books maybe for one semester. And we just thought that that was not enough. As we looked around, we discovered some towns that had much more aggressive programs. Oxford Hill, for example, has $11 million trust fund. Brunswick has $8 million. It's been around for years. And there are other towns. So we talked to a lot of other foundations. We talked to the Mitchell Foundation, Maine Community Foundation. We did a lot of research on it and decided we were going to start our own foundation. So we did. We're incorporated. We've got a 501c3 pending. We've got already, we haven't even asked anybody for money yet. We've already got $160,000 in pledges. Was I going to say anything else, or was I going to turn it over to you?
Well, you can if you want them, but you can pass those out too.
Well, we can.
We've missed you guys. Yes.
We've got a website. We've got a 6-person board of directors. We're working on increasing the size of the board of directors. And
I might just ask you get a little closer to the mic.
Oh, better?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah, we've got 6 people on our board. We're probably looking to increase that at some point. Fred will tell you about what our plans are. We're passing around the mission statement. This is from our website. And Fred will tell you about what our immediate plans are and what our hopes are for the future.
Okay, here's the problem. If I keep this mask up, my glasses fog up and I can't read my notes. So I'm going to pull it down just a hair. We're really excited to be here tonight to present our idea, which is our goal is to provide need-based scholarships to promising students at Freeport High School. We plan to make an ongoing award of to 2 students per year of $5,000 up to $5,000 for 4 years. And in order to do that, we need to raise $1 million, which I'll get to in a few minutes. We plan to make an award to a junior each year and a senior each year. We think that the award to the junior, which would be contingent upon satisfactory completion of the senior year and acceptance into an institution of higher learning. Now, I should say that this is not all college-based. It could be people who want to go to a trade school.
Don't stray from the
People who want to
mic.
go to a community college. Please.
I know the mask makes it harder. I'm
I
sorry.
knew you were here for a reason. So, now I lost my train of thought. So, for the junior, we're hoping that that will provide them with the initiative and the goal of trying to reach for something that they didn't think they could possibly get if they didn't have this kind of scholarship. For the senior, as I said, they're need-based. We will do one other thing, which is as important as the money, and that is we're providing mentorship to each of these students for 4 years. And when we looked at the Promise Foundation, which is at USM, which provides scholarships to 100 first-generation college students in the Portland area, and at the Mitchell Foundation, which provides 4-year scholarships to every high school in the state, that they said that the most important part of their program was the mentorship, and that the kids and mentors who connected at least 4 times a year had a very high likelihood of success in graduating. So the question becomes, how are we going to do this? And there are 3 steps that we're taking right now. And as I said, our goal is $1 million, our initial goal. First is the board pledges that John mentioned, which is a nice start, and we haven't gone out to any of the public or any of the people that we think might be interested in donating. The second is something that we discovered in doing our research, and that was that the town holds approximately 8 funds that belong to the school department that were never transferred over when the RSU was formed. The income has come over to Jen every year, but the funds are being managed by the town. 7 or 8 of these funds, we can't find the documentation for. So we're hopeful that at some point those funds will be rolled into our scholarship foundation and managed by us, and that represents about $100,000. There's one other trust, which is called the Christine Small Cushing Trust, which was awarded in 1999, which was set up in 1999 in memory of Leon Cushing's wife, Christine. And if you have been around Freeport for a long time, you know that both the Small name and the Cushing names go way back in our history. This fund has about $250,000 in it, and we have the, do you have the fund? I mean, the trust agreement? Okay, the trust agreement says essentially that the income, 90% of the income every year will be given to Freeport High School senior or seniors. And this trust has to be kept intact, and what we're proposing is that we, in collaboration with Jen Gulko, who is the trustee of the fund as the principal of Freeport High School, we, in conjunction with her, manage these funds with our investment manager, who's going to be Bath Savings Trust Company. And this will be kept separately, but will be used in part to help fund our scholarships. There is a memorandum of agreement, what's it called? A memorandum of understanding that John wrote, which outlines what each person's responsibility is. And what were we supposed to do? Did that get passed out too? Okay. So, you were supposed to talk longer.
I was?
Yeah. And I find it surprising that you didn't, frankly.
I can finish it up.
You will. Wait a second. Okay, the applications for both the junior and the senior are now on the website. I don't remember the dates they have to be in, but it's in May and June. We'll be making both awards. The junior will be for the year 22, 22 fall semester, and the other one will be made next fall. So, one thing I didn't mention, or we didn't mention, was the members of our board. We've got a great board, small, about to add another member. Stephanie Payne, Jeff Zachow, Warren Graver, Jen Fox, Megan Palmer, my personal favorite.
It's nice to have a competent partner.
John Patterson and myself. So John will finish up.
Yeah, you know, there's really not more to say. This was just for your information. Although I should say that, you know, in the future, we may come back to you and ask the school committee to make a contribution to the foundation, since it's all going to go to the kids. Some of the other towns do that. The Oxford Hills High School Fund gives out almost $800,000 a year in scholarships to their kids. Brunswick does something comparable. We didn't make a complete canvass of the entire state, but we were kind of shocked and thought, well, if they can do it, if Oxford Hills can do it, sure as heck Freeport, Durham, and Pownell can create a serious trust fund to do something serious for kids. And we need to give Becky Foley recognition too, which we met early on with Becky and Jen. And it was partly through Becky's urging that we decided to make really large scholarship awards. We called them, and Becky called them, life-changing awards. Giving a kid $800 at the end of when they graduate from high school is nice, and it's a nice pat on the back, but it doesn't change anybody's life. And what we decided to do is we want to change some lives of kids who couldn't otherwise become plumbers or electricians or doctors or engineers. Just give these kids a chance, and that's what this was all about. Becky urged us to do that, and that's why, you know, we're going to start out with 2 scholarships. You know, hopefully the day will come when we'll have 20. But that's what we're all about. We're happy to answer any questions. The agreement, the memorandum of understanding we gave you is, I guess, for informational purposes, it's with Jen, because Jen is the trustee of the Cushing Trust. It puts Jen on our board, so there's full collaboration. We'll be managing our combined funds. We have an arrangement with Bath Savings, and they'll be giving us a special break on the fee, which is better, I think, than what the town got from Bangor Savings. And we will then collaborate on making awards. So that's I think, all we have to say. We're happy to answer any questions if you want.
Jen.
So I think what you're doing is fantastic. I've witnessed for the past few years, the ceremony, for lack of a better word, that they do at Oxford Hills to give out the scholarships. My husband has a business up there. And it is a huge town, all towns, there's like 7 towns up there. And the place is packed with everyone who's involved with each scholarship, and they present it. And I've often thought that I would love to see something like that happen in Freeport, where it's not just, you know, the night of candlelight, parents are there, students are there, and, you know, a few scholarships are given out to students, which is how it goes now. So what I really hope is that word gets out that you're doing this, and that other businesses and, you know, other families that have, you know, the ability to do it kind of follow suit. You know, hopefully, you know, if we can get this be a great story to put in the newspaper. Just because I think that Freeport has a really great community, but I think it's just something that isn't happening, not because people don't want it, because no one's just really thought to do it. And I think you guys could be the beginning, which I think is fantastic.
Well, so far we're encouraged with the few people we've approached and their interest in the program, and this Cushing Trust in particular really gives us a credible start with around $500,000.
And that's what's happened. And we talked to the head of the president of the foundation in Oxford Hills, and it's become a focal point for community giving. It started out with one very large donor, but since then they had donations made on behalf of, in the honor of retiring teachers, all kinds of things, and it's become a as I said, a focal point for community giving up there. There's no reason why we can't do it here.
Susanna?
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you very much for doing this. I was getting chills when you were talking, so thank you. And I think 2 things that specifically speak to me, and then I have a question, is that I'm really delighted to hear that this isn't just for 4-year schools, but looking for further education, however that can be defined. And I think that's something that we tend, as not necessarily a school unit, but as a society in general, tend to just push college as a four-year institution. And so, to really put pressure or put emphasis on other options and support those and being able to get that support, I think is fantastic. So I'm really happy to hear that. And the other thing that I was really delighted about is the mentorship. And I can say that I graduated grad school, but I went straight from college about a year and a half ago. And I had scholarship and a mentor that was part of that scholarship. And just going in, so I mean, having gone through college and grad school and getting out and the whole student debt issue with the scholarship, I mean, just made me feel all the way through really supported. And just knowing that I'm not just here for myself, I'm here for a community. I think just it gave me confidence, and it made me sort of aspire to things that I wouldn't necessarily have maybe felt, because now I suddenly have somebody believing in me, even if I didn't believe in myself. So I'm really, really happy about that mentorship aspect. And also just beyond that, I think one of the challenges for me through college and school is how to figure out how the system works, because it's so different from high school. And so just a lot of it, I think, for me was, these challenges that you have to sort out, and to have somebody who's there and you can talk about it, and these decisions that you need to make, and how to deal with situations. I think that's just life-changing as well. So I'm really happy to hear about all of that. The one question I do have is, and I feel like there was something in here that one of these documents that referenced this, and I just can't find it right now. The funds, scholarship funds, are those able to be joined with other scholarships? I mean, because schools obviously have different costs, and students get different funding from different sources. Can this be used for, is it tuition only? Can it be used for supplies for the school? Does it go directly to the what are the stipulations with that? And maybe if it's, combined with some other funding, I'm just wondering how this can be used.
The way all scholarship funds work that we've talked to is that they pay the monies directly to the schools. Yep. The checks do not go to the kids themselves. There are tricky issues about giving scholarship money to kids, because some colleges actually cut back on their own aid. The big three in Maine, for example, Bowdoin, Bates, and Colby, sometimes actually reduce their own financial aid in light of any outside aid a student may get. So that one of the things and we've talked to Mitchell about this, we've talked to Maine Community Foundation and others. It'll be a tricky task to not have this be a zero-sum game, so we just add money.
Well, and it becomes taxable income too, or can for the student. Right. But I'm just wondering about, can it be, because supplies can be quite challenging, the books and materials, and whether there's...
I can't say that we've worked that out. Well, probably something we'll be addressing as we mature. And,
I think if the money doesn't come back, if the school doesn't allow it to go as a grant, they may allow us to reduce the amount of student loans that the student has. But it's really tricky, and people like the Mitchell Foundation have a lot more leverage than we do, and they say it's hard at times to get them to commit to not reducing the overall award. So we'll have to see how that goes.
In our wildest dreams, if we were ever as successful as Mitchell and as the Promise Foundation at USM, that's about $10 million. If we were ever as successful as that, they have emergency funds, so that if a kid has a laptop break, they can help with that. We're not anywhere near doing that yet, but it's certainly something that we're well aware of. And someday when we have $10 million, we'll be doing that.
I think the short answer to your question is we'll do everything we can to get money to the kid that they need in order to go to college, whether it be tuition loans or books and room and board and that kind of stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that was just my question, whether it's tuition only or whether it's, college expenses, but really you've answered that. And yeah, no, I understand that in full, so thank you.
And as to your point about for lack of a better word, vocational and technical training. We all strongly believe in that. Every member of our board believes in that. Fred and I have done mentoring over the years for kids who, you know, we encourage to go that route. This is not a fund for elitists who go to Ivy League schools. This is for kids to, we want to make successful plumbers and electricians and welders and college graduates. It doesn't matter to us. We want both.
Maddie.
Hi, guys.
You look vaguely familiar.
Yeah,
At least
I know.
At least from here up.
Good to see you.
Hi.
This is really exciting. I'm excited about how far it's come along because I first heard about it when it was sort of in the ethers. So this is great. I'm also really excited about this being a life-changing gift because we don't see kids really applying to many scholarships these days. It's been in decline. So I hope that as you roll this out, you'll roll it out directly to the student population and work with Jen to ensure that there's some excitement around it and some buzz in the community as well, because hopefully this will not only grow the foundation that you've started, but also sort of the appetite for finding resources to make one's dreams come true. I also really hope that there will be a strong focus on those vocational jobs, because we're hearing a lot about that at the national level. A lot of folks are not going into those jobs, and we need it nationwide. So I'm excited about that opportunity. And then the mentoring thing is fantastic. I'm presuming that'll be board members that'll be providing that mentoring.
We'll be finding the mentors.
What's that?
We'll be finding the mentors if we don't, with Jen's help. She
Right.
doesn't realize how important she is to this process and how much she's going to get called on.
It's a whole other job.
Right.
That is that's really exciting too, because I don't think colleges, even some of the best Ivies out there, I don't think they do a great job at ensuring that kids who are struggling get the help that they need. And so having somebody from home who's a ready resource is really great. So my thanks as well.
Valerie.
Thank you so much. This is very exciting. And I just wanted to follow up on what Maddie was saying about the applicants that you might get. She is absolutely right that unfortunately it's just a handful of students who apply to all of the scholarships and not necessarily the ones who need the scholarships.
Right.
So that's crucial that you have a good reach within the student population to invite and entice all of the students to apply. I talked to guidance the year that our son graduated because I was a little taken aback by the fact that there were maybe 12 students getting all the scholarships, and they were all families who can afford college.
Yeah.
So that will be tricky, and I'm sure Jen has already told you about it, and guidance has said that they're trying to improve the interest that they generate with the scholarships, but I think it will be super important to reach the right population. But thank you so much. This is amazing, and I look forward to seeing who gets it and what they do with it.
So are we.
Jen.
Just to follow up, Valley, on what you said, I know that Oxford Hills gives out a literal booklet that lists every single scholarship, has an application, and the application, I mean, it's a part of the culture there at the school. So that would definitely be something that, you know, like you said, Valley, I mean, a lot of kids aren't applying, and if it was like really pushed on all the kids that are juniors and seniors, I think that would be great.
I think the focus of including the vocational education is huge. I'm a huge proponent of that. I love that. The mentorship, I just assumed it was going to be you two mentoring the world, no? That's how you get them to listen to you, you give them money?
Our time has passed.
No, but I love the mentorship. And then I really like you guys have clearly thought this through, the concept of, awarding one before they're applying to all the colleges, so people don't shortchange themselves and go, geez, even if I got in there, I couldn't afford it, so why bother even trying? I love that concept of, knowing knowing that you have some support before you even get to that process, I think is huge. So, you know, I like the pieces of it. What did I do?
That was
Becky?
That was Becky's idea.
Great job,
And Jen.
Becky.
Becky and Jen deserve the credit on that one.
Hey, you guys sought out the right resources, so good job. Thank you, as always.
It's nice to see you're still here, by the way, Michelle.
Yeah, good for you. I don't know about for me or everybody else around here, but.
It's been a great collaboration, and I really can't thank the two of you enough for what you're doing for RSU 5. And if somebody is listening tonight at home and wants to make a donation, where would you direct them to?
To our website,
Which is
Which
called?
is what?
fhsscholarships.org.
Could you go to the mic?
FHSscholarships.org.
Scholarships.
Plural, because there's more than one scholarship. Plural. Got it.
Maybe we could put that on our
Link. Yeah.
Facebook.
Right on the, it's on the bottom of one of the documents.
Yes. Yeah, we have it.
You can certainly put it on your website. That would
Yeah,
be,
well, that's, yeah. I'm sure we can figure something out for them.
yeah.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. All right. We've thrown all these people ahead of him, but I think we are up to the good news and recognition, our report from Liam.
All right, I'll promise to keep it short. So yeah, not too much to report again today, but AP exams are starting next week. I believe Monday? No, Wednesday. Sorry, I think they're starting Wednesday. Today we took a picture of the senior class on the turf with a drone, which was pretty neat. So we got the entire class in, kind of in a circle around the big F out there. And then we're also doing a senior car wash on May 8th to raise funds at the Freeport Masonic Lodge. And the juniors are doing a hanging plant spring fundraiser with Esther Brooks right now too. Yeah, you can also support the Performing Arts Booster. As many of you probably already know, Bow Street Market is currently accepting returnable cans and bottles and will donate the proceeds to the Performing Arts Booster, and the collection area is to the left of the front door behind the blue mailbox. And yeah, I guess I'll get to athletics. I don't have too much to report, primarily just, I guess I've got tennis, baseball, and outdoor track. But boys tennis played NYA yesterday, and we couldn't complete the game, but we were at 2-2. The last one went a little too late, and that's why it had to be postponed. And both girls and boys played Mount Ararat today. Boys won 4-1, and I think the girls may have still been playing before, but stopped when it started raining, so I'm not sure about their score right now. Varsity baseball beat Cape Elizabeth yesterday, and softball also played Cape Elizabeth yesterday, but I didn't see the outcome yet on the website, so I'm not completely sure about that. And lastly, outdoor track and field has their first meet on May 1st at Yarmouth High School.
Year, as well as Rachel Olson, Freeport High School social studies teacher, and Laura Palacios, the art teacher at Freeport Middle School. Then on to COVID updates. In RSU 5, we are now at 39 confirmed and 3 probable, for a total of 42 of our students having tested positive for COVID since September. With the 10 staff members who have tested positive, we're at 52 total positive cases in RSU 5. We have had 6 new positive cases in students in the past 14 days. Both boys lacrosse teams, both varsity and junior varsity, are in quarantine due to one of the opponents testing positive. The same is true for the girls' varsity lacrosse teams. Boys will be able to come out of quarantine on May 2nd, and the girls will be out until May 3rd. Since my last update to you, Freeport is now at 280 cases, Durham 137, Pownell remains between 20 and 49, and South Freeport remains between 6 and 19. All schools, as you know, continue to be back to 5-day-a-week learning. Recently, Androscoggin County has been designated to be in yellow. We're following that data very closely, but at this time we have made the decision to remain in green at Durham Community School. I want to remind families that if you travel, the over-the-counter self-administered COVID test that you can now get cannot be used for the purpose that your child can return to school. You must go to a testing site for this, and so we encourage you to do that. We have heard from our partners at Midcoast that there are plenty of appointment slots for the COVID vaccine if you have not already received yours. I would love to encourage everyone who is eligible to receive the vaccine, because I do think it's our way out of what we have experienced this year. And then lastly, on the COVID updates, the MPA came out today aligning their recommendation with the state guidance that just came out, allowing people to be outdoors unmasked. I am recommending to you, based upon Craig's recommendation to me, that we go with their recommendation. And I kind of want to make everyone aware of what that means. I just passed out a copy of what we received from the MPA, that this would mean that masks are not required for outdoor practices or competition. Masks are recommended when 6 feet of physical distance is hard to maintain. For example, the athletes sitting on the bench. They are also required for individuals as soon as they enter into the building, such as the locker rooms or restrooms or on a bus. Under this recommendation, spectators would not be required to wear a mask at outside events if they are able to maintain the 6 feet of distancing, which I know Craig, who is here tonight, has done a great job of marking our bleachers and everything up. So I'd like to pause right there. I know this is not my norm, but just to see if anybody has questions around that before I finish my report.
Vali?
Becky, my question is, when there's students, athletes on the field, how do we measure 6 feet? I mean, they're moving around all the time. We can't ensure that they will be 6 feet apart.
No. So I don't think it's, I think everybody knows that. And so it's just like masks are off while they're playing in the competition. It's when they're sitting on the bench or the spectators where there is an expectation that we're trying to keep kids 6 feet apart.
Okay, so you're saying that for athletes, the 6 feet is not a requirement.
That's
when they're
correct.
on the field without a mask.
Correct.
Okay.
I think the concept is that generally they're not staying in one spot. They're not staying in close proximity to any individual person for an extended period of time, as opposed to sitting next to them on the bus or on the bench or whatever, is my guess, but I'm not a scientist by any stretch. Jen?
So I guess my question would be, with the report that you just had about the lacrosse teams, both lacrosse teams quarantining. So if the assumption is that they're out on the field unmasked and then somebody tests positive from another team, which is what I think happened with the lacrosse team. So then we're gonna require, though, even though we don't believe anyone had what is close enough contact to be considered needing to quarantine, but we're going to still quarantine all those athletes?
So let me clarify, I think, something Michelle said. We're not saying that they won't need to quarantine. And so even with the CDC makes the decision of who has to quarantine. I'm glad you're giving me the opportunity to clarify that, because I've had some questions in the last week around this about, why am I recommending this? And this is one of the areas where it is not a recommendation from the CDC, it's a requirement. So with every case, we call the CDC and they ask a lot of questions to our nurses. And then with the information they're provided, they make the decision of who we have to quarantine. So I think what Michelle is saying is that the thinking is you're moving pretty quick and we don't think there's a huge chance of contracting the virus that way. But once somebody tests positive, whether we're wearing those masks or not, the CDC is making that determination of who we have to quarantine.
That just seems very confusing, I think, in
Yes.
terms of you're quarantining students based on like you said, the CDC is basing it on close contact, but we're not, or the Principals Association is not considering being on the field with other players close contact?
Yet, that's the part, no, I think they are considering that. I mean, we recognize when you're playing soccer or lacrosse or any sport like that, that you're in close contact. But it's the CDC that determines, are you in close contact long enough to have to go into quarantine? One of the most recent examples with one of the lacrosse teams is the person who tested positive was on the field, I think, for 2 minutes. Is that correct, Craig?
It is.
And from that 2 minutes, any of our students that were on the field had to quarantine. So whether they had their mask on, it didn't matter. It didn't matter what position they were playing. That's what they used on that day to determine who had to quarantine.
So if that same kid was in this cafeteria for 2 minutes,
Correct.
we would not quarantine the other kids in the cafeteria.
That's correct. That would be my assumption based upon the 52 cases we've had.
But I was told in this last recent incident, it wasn't just the kids on the field during that 2 minutes. It was all the kids who were on the field in the fourth quarter. And I was standing there when our school nurse was speaking to the CDC, and the school nurse said, but he was only on the field for 2 minutes. And they said, for athletics, we don't use the 6 feet or 15 minutes to define close contact. If they're on the field with the person, they're on the field with the person. So whether you're wearing a mask or no mask, it's not going to make a difference.
So to me, that tells me that they think the athletics is a riskier activity, right? Like, it doesn't matter if it's 15 minutes, 30 seconds is enough. So why are they recommending removing the masks? Maddie?
But this is a recommendation from the MPA.
It's
not
the
CDC.
CDC. Yesterday was the CDC. The CDC dropped it yesterday.
Yes, but the mask requirement for athletics, the recommendations for athletics is being recommended by the MPA, and that's my question, because at the start of the year, the MPA and the CDC were not communicating very clearly with one another, and I'm wondering if this is another instance of that, and if we should just pump the brakes.
So they're following the guidance of the CDC, meaning the CDC came out with no mask wearing, was it yesterday?
But just, they didn't make any distinctions. They just said, unless it's, and that was one of my questions, and maybe this is my fault for not reading the main CDC. So the US CDC came out with a ruling, like, limiting outdoor mask wearing. But my understanding is that one was people that are fully vaccinated, right? And then the main rules that came down after that were those just outside? Like, did they strip the fully vaccinated piece out of the recommendation?
Yes.
And the reasoning, as I understand it, was because Maine's vaccination rates are generally higher, they were willing to take to make that step. So.
Oh, okay.
The other thing with the MPA's recommendation, after the fall and some of the fallout, the MPA did work more closely with Department of Health and Human Services and the community sports guidelines. And in their statement, please know that these recommendations fully align with the main community sports guidelines that have been updated. They weren't updated when the MPA sent this out, so I don't know if they've been updated since.
And those are driven by DHHS, the main CDC.
Correct.
So that would imply that they agree.
So my understanding is they dropped, based on what Jeremy said, that the main CDC dropped the requirement to be fully vaccinated because we have a high percentage of people being vaccinated. Those are not students. So it seems a little backwards, honestly. And also, I mean, reading this and hearing Craig say, if you're an athlete, it doesn't matter how long or how close you are to the positive case, you quarantine and you can't attend school in addition to play sports. That's a big flag for parents who have student athletes to want to let them play. I mean, I'm just thinking of my own children and thinking this is a huge risk. Is there anything that can be done so that everything can be aligned to be a little more coherent?
I don't know about that, but today we hosted the girls tennis team from Mount Ararat and the girls JV softball team from Cape Elizabeth. And both of those teams were prepared to come here today and play without masks. And after talking with the superintendent, we thought that we would better, and some of the schools are still wearing masks until it's approved locally. And with the school board meeting tonight, we thought that was a good time to bring it up. And so when Mount Ararat and Cape came, I told them that for today, at least, we are going to wear masks because we don't have anything else locally approved. The question is, and no one's given me an answer, is the guidelines from the MPA say you don't have to wear masks. If Mount Ararat and Cape said, well, we don't have to because the guidelines say we don't have to, but luckily both teams agreed. I talked to another athletic director today. Probably about 50% of our schools are going maskless starting today. The other 50% are doing what we're doing tonight and waiting until local approval. But there is several games being played tonight with one school wearing masks and the other school not.
So the article, Channel 8, when the decision came out, it specifically says that school districts still have the authority to set their own policies and protocols, which could include continued use of masks. Are you saying that they can only set it for their kids, even if other people are playing on their fields?
So, yeah, I'm not sure that question has been answered. You know, we just went to NYA for, I forget the sport, girls lacrosse. And they did not allow visiting fans. And when we got off the bus, they took the forehead temperature of every one of our students and coaches. That's their home protocols. Now, it's still not answered. If NYA says when you come to our facility, you have to wear masks, but the overarching MPA guideline says you don't have to, where do we stand? And I don't think anybody's answered that question. And like I said earlier, tonight, there are games being played with one school wearing masks and one school not.
I always think of rules as you can always make them stricter than the broader governing body, but you can't make them looser, right? I mean, we can't make state laws that are looser than the federal laws, but we can make them tighter if we want to. And I think the same is true for towns, right? We learned that with the county, you know, trying to get rid of the mask mandate that the state had in place. They didn't have the authority to do that, right? So I feel like as a district, we could set tighter rules, right? We could say we require masks on our fields, but we couldn't do the opposite. Like a month ago, we couldn't have said, don't worry about masks, we're good without them here. I mean, I don't know. I mean, if somebody wanted to fight, and I guess their option is not to play us, right? I mean,
I think we could definitely just say, we won't play you without your mask on. I mean, I can't imagine having games here saying that our athletes have to have a mask on if we go that way and the other team doesn't.
Yeah.
But we would want to communicate that in advance so that if they want to pull out, they can pull out.
But then the opposite is, like, if Mount Ararat doesn't require masks and we go there, are we willing to send our kids there if our kids are wearing masks and theirs aren't?
Well, you can see why we wanted to discuss it.
Yeah, so this recommendation brings us back to where we began in the fall. So when we began athletics in the fall, this is exactly what we were doing. We were playing on the field, on the surface without masks, but wearing masks on the sidelines, on the bench, and the coaches and the officials. So this is kind of taking us back to where we began in the fall with with basically the same exact guidelines.
That's a good point. That seems so long ago. That's true.
It does. It seems like a long time ago.
Maura?
I don't want to put Liam on the spot, but I was wondering what he was thinking and about a student perspective.
Yeah, it's a difficult question because of the jurisdiction of other school districts, obviously, on having your own team wear masks and them not. Generally, I still look at, or I tried to put myself into the shoes of a sophomore me or a freshman me. A lot of juniors and a lot of seniors, well, I guess some juniors and a lot of seniors have gotten vaccinated, but a lot of freshmen and sophomores haven't. And I just wonder if it sends a wrong signal. At least I would have taken it back then as a weird signal. We're kind of going maskless. We're kind of going back to normal because a lot of people, a lot of the older athletes are getting vaccinated, and for us, it's nearing the end of the pandemic. But for a lot of the younger athletes, and there's quite a few that are under 16 at Freeport High School, I think it would still be good to have a mask. But again, it's difficult because you also have to think about the other schools going to a different school. But personally, I think it's kind of difficult again, but I think it would be okay to go to a different school. Let's just say Greeley, and Freeport wears masks, but Greeley doesn't. But I think if it's home turf, then I still think it should be the complete jurisdiction of the board to decide whether or not masks should be required. That's my overall thought.
Thank you. Jen?
It's a really difficult situation. I feel like the way that the CDC does the quarantining is actually way more confusing to me than the thought of the masks, because if you're already having to quarantine if you're on the field with a mask, no matter what, I'm not sure playing with masks is helping anything. I mean, transmission, but if they're saying that transmission is not like, a big issue on the field, and we're already, we have 2 teams that are quarantining because of, what seems like a basic brush with one person who has COVID. I mean, I'm struggling with thinking if that's already the case, I'm not sure how much masks are contributing to any kind of betterment of the situation. But at the same time, you hate to think if you take the masks away that all of a sudden you see an uptick. So I'm really stuck on this issue.
Vali?
And the way I look at it is we are seeing an uptick in COVID cases in young people. There are variants like the B117 and other variants that are much more transmissible, and they're infecting much younger groups of people. And like Liam said, half or over half of the student population at the high school cannot get vaccinated yet. So for me, transmission is really important because it's not just when they're being athletes that they may be exposed. They may be on the field, be exposed, then come into the school building the next day and create problems for transmission for other non-athletes who are in the school. So from where I sit, I would rather follow something along the lines of what Liam was saying, okay, we mask up. We have our rules for our district, for opponents who come here. When we go play somewhere else, if they don't mask up, but we do, that's better for cutting down on transmission than if neither one is wearing masks. So, I mean, I see how things are improving for all the people who are able to get vaccinated, but we have to remember we have a lot of athletes who can't. And I really would rather just be on the safe side, especially because we only have 7 weeks to go, and these kids need to be in school, in the classrooms, learning, in addition to playing sports. So they're playing sports now with masks. They have adjusted to them. They're doing well with them. I really don't see that this is the right time to take that risk.
Maddie?
I agree with everything Valerie just said, because I also don't know how we can possibly expect families and kids to take our administrators seriously when we ask them to be really careful when they're not at school. And then we say, oh, but on the field it's okay. That sends such a mixed message, and it's the wrong one to send.
Jeremy?
I think one thing that we should consider is that the CDC guidelines that applied to the 2 lacrosse games were the prior guidelines, because those games happened in the before the new rulings came out. So I think it'd be interesting to see if those guidelines change also in terms of duration of a player on the field who was infected. So I think it's important to note that there has been a new line drawn since both of those games happened. And I think the other thing to consider is that from what I understand around the science of transmission, it really is about air exchange. And air exchange outside is basically unlimited. And air exchange inside is a whole different ballgame. And that's, in my mind, a very important dividing line. And if we're also talking about safety of students, vision is dramatically impaired by the masks, and I think that needs to be included in this, especially in a sport like lacrosse, where you've got a helmet on and you're working in tighter spaces, if you will, and baseball with a ball coming at your head at a high rate of speed. I think those has to be included as part of the mix, but I really hope that we look at the air exchange angle as a very important part of the discussion.
Lindsay?
Oh, Jeremy answered my question. I'm so confused by the CDC games, but by what happened to our 2 teams, but he answered that.
Jeremy, can you say that again? Because
Well, because the CDC, whether it be the U.S. or the main CDC guidelines, only changed yesterday, and these games happened 3 and 4 days ago. I can say the boys' game happened last Wednesday that it happened. So a week from today, last week that it's happened. So, the guidelines have changed. Now, do we know if the on-field guidelines have changed yet? No, but it's all a little bit fluid because it just happened, the change.
So just so I know what you're saying, so you're thinking that maybe the quarantining guidelines may change due to the CDC because okay.
And that's completely just an educated guess based on that, things are fluidly changing. So.
Thanks.
Jen?
Hi, if I can just add in for a second, I'll just give the experience of the classroom. So at the start of the year, the rule was that if someone tested positive, the entire classroom quarantined, no matter what the seating chart was or anything. We had a positive case here, and we were in the middle of contact tracing, and the rule changed at 4 p.m., and we then fell under that new rule. And so now the new rule in a classroom is within 6 feet, and we have set seating charts, so we will no longer quarantine an entire classroom. So along with what Jeremy is saying, there's a chance that we don't have any information on this, that they could now come out and say it's by position or how long you were on the field or where you were. We don't know that, but that's how fast things changed, that we were in the middle of calling families, and we actually called back and said, never mind, you're not quarantined. So I think that there's a shot that could happen.
In fact, I got a never mind call myself.
Oh yeah, he was on the Jeremy was on the list.
So just a couple of things from my perspective, and a couple of these has been a very hot topic of conversation. One team playing a sport against another team, one team playing a sport with masks on against another team without mask on. One student running the mile with a mask on, one student running the mile without a mask on. Mask on, mask off, that's two differently dramatic things to compare. There is no comparison. There is a huge advantage to the team with a person not wearing a mask. To say that we'll only play teams who wear masks, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, all right, we're going to have teams that aren't going to play us. That's going to affect the number of games we can play. Can I schedule other teams? The whole one-loss heel point tournament thing, which may not be a big deal to some, but when you've missed your whole season and now you have a season and now you may miss it again, I think those couple things are huge. And for me, I'm going to be at the gate and I'm going to see spectators come in. And I would love to have you come and help me to kind of administer that, because there are going to be parents and spectators who come in and say, Governor Mills says that we don't have to wear masks outside if we're 6 feet social distancing. Yeah, but that's not our rule. Well, Governor Mills trumps you, or, it's just going to be a nightmare.
Beth.
I don't think I have any incredible insight, and I understand the difficulty of the topic. However, I do, with what Jeremy brought up about the science of the air exchange, there have been, and I'm certainly not a scientist, but I have read several articles, and I know that there's been a few more studies done recently that have come out saying that the risk of transmission outside is just so minimal. And so when I hear, when that is starting to come up in the science, that there's, doing more studying that, and they're figuring out these things, that, it starts to feel like, we need to listen to the new science, and make those decisions. And so like having, the guidelines kind of come down saying that they aren't required, that to me is they are looking at the science and following the science recommendations as of late. And so I feel like that we need to look at that and really follow those guidelines versus making our own sort of rogue decisions based on other things. That's all.
You know how we love to go rogue around here, Beth. I guess, Angela.
I just what Craig said about the competition. I just feel like there's a lot of excitement right now, just kids that are going to be competing, and then this kid has a mask, this kid doesn't. It's not going to go over very well. And like what happened with the cross country season, where they ran without their masks, only when they were stopped they put them on. But then when they were told for the states they'd have to wear masks, it was the coach's decision. It's not worth it to have kids running cross country competition with masks on, So I do think, like you said, that following if this is evolving, we're learning more about outdoor space and how it can be okay, that we should consider that.
I think this was our take in the fall, right? When we decided how to do it, we said we would follow the CDC guidelines. Last time I checked, nobody on this board was a doctor or a medical professional or a scientist, maybe some scientists. But, we said we had our own feelings about how we thought it should work. Should they wear masks? Should they not? And we came back to, the people who do know are this is their recommendation. And that's what we followed all the way through. We followed it getting kids back to school. We followed it in athletics. To me, if they said, if you wore a mask, you wouldn't have to quarantine, then that might be a risk we might be willing to take, right? Because it's important to have our kids in class. But Jen's point of with or without, if our two things that we're worried about are transmission and making sure our kids are staying in school, not quarantining, the masks don't matter on the quarantine discussion. So until they do, we can take that off the table if we're going to have athletics at all. And then if the transmission piece is the question, I do hear Valley on the variants and seeing more kids that are testing positive, but the science, based on the professionals, they're still comfortable making this recommendation at the national level, at the state level, and then through the DHHS. So my preference, while it seems a little counterintuitive to me, but I certainly don't have all of the information, would be to follow the CDC recommendations. Susanna.
Thank you. I've appreciated all of this discussion, but I've got two clarifying questions. One is, Liam brought up the point on high school teams about the masks, about only, half or fewer than half of the students, less than half, being vaccinated or eligible for vaccinations. But I assume this applies to middle school or other levels at which there would be nobody vaccinated. So I am wondering about the CDC guidelines for quarantining, just because, and I thank Jeremy for pointing out that the guidelines have changed, just because it does seem a little bit arbitrary that we're saying that, you can gather in small groups if you're vaccinated or with vaccinated, unvaccinated people outside. But the emphasis, there was one document yesterday about maintaining that distance, but then in sport we're saying it doesn't really matter. And with that time frame of the lacrosse cases being on the field for 2 minutes. So I was just wondering, do we know when guidance is going to come out from the CDC about how that quarantining system is going to work, or what their definition is going to be, if it's, such as that 2 minute just being on the field?
No.
Okay, thank you.
I can expand on the no, but even when they've told us, we were going to get a new SOP at the end of last week, it didn't come, but then it comes I think we got it 2 days later on Tuesday, and I also think that unless we're talking inside the classroom, and even then, every case they analyze and make a decision, and so sometimes it's a pleasant surprise, like Jen said, and then other times it didn't make any sense to me about the lacrosse team. And if that happens tomorrow, we might get a different answer.
So the experience we've only had so far is with lacrosse teams, and there's much more player interaction with lacrosse than baseball, softball, and tennis, and track. And actually track, some of those activities are low risk, and some of them are moderate risk. But I've got to believe that they will treat tennis differently than lacrosse, just because of the space and the distance. And I got to believe they would treat baseball, softball differently, because a center fielder is near no one, unless they go to bat. And so I've got to believe that they've got to treat those things differently.
Lindsay.
I think I align with Michelle and Beth in taking the what's coming down from the top, from the CDC and MPA, and knowing that our mitigation efforts in the schools, there's been no in-school transmission. So even if one of our students playing contracts it somehow, the fresh air thing has never made much sense to me intuitively. I'm not an epidemiologist, I'm not a virologist or any of this, but intuitively being outside, it hasn't made a lot of sense to me, which doesn't say anything. I'm just trying to say I would take my guidelines from the CDC, knowing that our in-school mitigation efforts are working. They have not proven otherwise. So even if an athlete comes in having somehow contracted, and I agree lacrosse is in your face, I also know that they're pulling their masks down in lacrosse anyway. I have some inside intel on that. So so that is a fact. That is a relative. It's a valid point. even if an athlete comes in having contracted it, I believe in our mitigation efforts. I believe they're working. I know that our windows can be open. I know that we're all masked. I know that we're sanitizing. I know that we have 3 feet between the students. So I have faith in that, and I am willing to stand by what the CDC MPA is recommending. Thank you.
Maura.
I was wondering, Craig, if any of the rules of play, you know, like how in the fall some of the rules of play changed for certain sports. Is that true now for like lacrosse or anything to allow players to distance more?
We have a lacrosse coach here.
I don't believe there's any changes in the lacrosse rules of play.
Not on the field, just the distancing that I can think of.
Yeah, they discussed the face-offs in boys lacrosse, where you have 2 kids down on the ground, the whistle blows, and they go after the ball. They, in the winter and fall, they changed rules that did not dramatically change the game. And they decided not to alter the face-off because there are students, high school students, who get scholarships as a face-off person. It is a specialized skill. And if you take that away, you dramatically alter the game. The same with the girls' face-offs. In baseball and softball, the only changes to the game, I guess in all games, the pregame meeting between the coaches and the captains, quite often there's 4 captains, 3 captains, and 2 coaches. It's just 1 coach and 1 captain, and they gotta be 6 feet apart. The officials in baseball, the home plate ump is now no longer the home plate umpire. He stands behind the pitcher and calls balls and strikes from 12 feet behind and to the left of the pitcher.
Have there been riots?
No, and there's been very few complaints about balls and strikes, because even from the players and even from the coaches, because you can't, everybody knows it's not gonna be perfect. In softball, the home plate umpire has to stand 6 feet behind the catcher so that they have that 6 feet of distancing. In tennis, there's no really rule changes for tennis. In track, I don't really think there's any rule changes for track. You know, the implements have to be sanitized and washed if shared, but as we all know and we've heard, there's less and less belief that sharing and touching objects, doorknobs, or a baton is gonna pass that. So I guess in the spring, there's very few rules, and I think that's because the spring sports are more spread out. Like in basketball, there was no jump balls. It was just all, alternate possession. In soccer, no one was supposed to touch the ball with their hands. But no, there's not a lot of rules change.
Thank you.
Vali.
So I have to say I'm really encouraged by what Jen said, that we're not quarantining entire rooms of students every time there's a positive case. So that's definitely comforting. But as far as following the CDC guidelines, I would be completely comfortable doing that, except that we have 2 sets of CDC guidelines. We have the national CDC guidelines saying if you're vaccinated, then go ahead and take off the mask. And then we have the main CDC guidelines saying take off the mask regardless of vaccination, because we have a high rate of vaccinated people. So I'm trying to reconcile which of these 2 CDC guidelines make most sense in our case, given that we have some who are vaccinated and a large portion of them not vaccinated. So if someone can elucidate which CDC guidelines you're talking about and why, that would be great. I mean, I don't want to just create disparities with other teams. I don't want our kids to not be able to breathe and either not participate in sports or suffer consequences of not being able to breathe with a mask on. But I have to say that it's very confusing, because we have more than 1 set of guidelines, and we have experts looking at studies that say transmission is much lower in open spaces, but despite that they're looking at the same sets of studies, they're coming out with different guidelines.
Beth.
I would lean towards personally following the Maine CDC guidelines as they are specific to Maine. And as we know, our country is very large and has many, many different types of schools, many different types of population centers. Just coming a few weeks ago, I had an emergency. I had to go to Texas to visit my mother, and those high schools there are like the size of colleges, and they have stadiums that they play football in for high school. So, I mean, I think, you know, for me, when I think about the whole country, that, you know, the federal CDC has to say it for everybody. But I feel like when you're listening to your Maine specific CDC, they're looking at Maine, and they're looking at what we're doing, our population, our numbers, things like that. So that's just where I'm coming from.
Maddie.
I'm feeling a little comforted by the things I'm hearing. Not 100% comfortable, but I mean, I was really concerned. I lost some faith with the MPA in the fall. But if, Craig, I think you pointed out, I just want to clarify. So in this email that we have a copy of from Mike Burnham, when it says, please know these recommendations fully align with the Maine community sport guidelines that have been updated, those were updated yesterday by DHHS in conjunction with the Maine CDC.
So that email came out today, 30 minutes after I sent an email saying everybody had to wear masks. As soon as that came out, I went to the DHH site, and it last updated was March 12th. So at that time, they hadn't updated it yet. But I'm guessing, as you know, Jeannie Lambro was quoted in the paper today saying that they would be updated by the end of the week. So I'm going to assume that they're going to be updated, and they're going to match what the MPA has sent out. I think the MPA had a little more urgency to get that out because we're playing now, and I'm not sure the urgency to update DHHS was as urgent as the MPA felt it was.
I just want some degree of comfort that those two agencies are talking.
They're talking more now. You know, the fall was a complete bust, and no one talked, and everyone waited for everybody else, and you know, the DHHS and told the MPA it's your gig. You come up with your guidelines. And then when they did, DHHS didn't like it, and so they said, well, wait a minute, I guess we're going to have to get involved. And so I think after the fall, they did talk and communicate. But it's funny because when it's not funny. When the MPA first gave their guidelines to the state agencies for review, in those guidelines was exactly what we did this fall. No athletes wearing masks, but on the bench. It was the CDC and the DHHS that said, no, you have to have masks. And so now, moving forward now, Ms. Penrod was quoted as saying that, well, that's up, you know, the mask thing is now up to the MPA. And so the MPA is going, well, wait a minute, it wasn't up to us before, but now you're saying it is. So I think because of that, you know, I do think communication with all the groups. I do know that they're having regular meetings with the state agencies. How often those happen, I don't know, but I do know that they meet, and they met, I think they met this morning, and that's where this came from.
I mean, my comfort level goes up if I know that they're working together.
I 100% agree with that. If this was just the MPA's suggestion without, you know, the CDC agreeing, then I would stick with whatever the because that's the scientific, you know, arm of who we should be, or, well, I guess it depends on who you ask if that's true or not, but who's been providing us with the information that we have based our decisions on. So, Liam.
Yeah, I guess I just want to kind of get back to the entire CDC guideline, the U.S. or the federal guideline and the state guideline. I'm still, I also don't know which one to choose. Obviously, that's ultimately also your decision. But if I understood correctly, Maine CDC guideline exempts the immunization aspect of the announcement because of the high vaccination rate. But at the end of the day, again, the student population, the first people who are getting their second vaccine in my age, in the 16 to 18 range, they would have gotten their second shot this Monday. The very first people would have gotten it this Monday. There's plenty of kids that haven't gotten it yet. So if you look at the rate, obviously, for the state, you've got the entire senior population, you have the 30 to 40 population that's vaccinated at a high rate, but then you look at the, let's just say, 12 to 18 population, and the rate is super low. It's very low. It doesn't hold up to the same variable that the state population does. So that's just something to consider, I think.
Yeah, it's hard. You know, I guess what I come down on that is thinking about the CDC made a ruling for the state, right? To Beth's point, they look at the demographics of everybody, right? So the fact that more of our overall population is vaccinated than other places, and we have more space per person than a lot of places do in the country, I think that brings down the overall rates, right? You know, for the kids who aren't vaccinated, or for the, you know, medically unable to get the vaccine folks, right? That's why they shoot for herd immunity, because you're never going to get 100% of people who can even get a vaccine, right? So I think the overall increase in the vaccination rate reduces the overall risk to those that are unvaccinated as well, and that's why they're willing to make a statement like that across the whole state. But I don't know.
I guess it just, I understand that the older population is vaccinated, but I mean, this is kid-to-kid transmission, not kid to an older person. That's why the herd immunity doesn't apply yet to the student population. That's kind of what I'm a little worried about, is that there really is no herd immunity on my tennis team. If you include the JV team as well, and they're part of the greater team, we practice together, then maybe 5 people have gotten their first vaccine, and 1 person got their second vaccine yesterday. So I'm more worried about transmission between kids than transmission to older people, older adults. Yeah.
Maura.
I just had one more question. So this isn't saying that kids cannot, this is just allowing the players to not mask. It's not telling anybody they can't still choose to wear a mask, or even a whole team that says we all want to protect each other. We're not all vaccinated. We still want to wear masks. That would still, the players could decide to do that.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
So
that is true, but yeah, we all have to admit that it's extremely awkward to ask a teenager who's in 9th or 10th grade to be the only one masking up. That raises a lot of questions, and I think we are here to make the decision for them. I don't think it's fair to let them decide. So we either decide they all mask up, or we decide they don't have to. But I don't think we should say, oh, we'll do this thing, because they will do whatever they feel is right for them anyhow, because there's a lot of pressure out there.
Yeah, no, I think the idea is that, you know, if we decide that we're comfortable with the CDC guidelines, and there was an individual person who was uncomfortable with that, they could choose to still wear a mask if it was important to them or their parents.
As long as we don't assume that it's an easy choice for those students,
for sure.
And that we can choose whatever we feel, whatever we want to decide, without taking into account that it puts some students in a very difficult position.
Mm-hmm. Lindsay, did you?
I was just going to say, we had players in the fall that absolutely,
that's true,
yeah, chose to practice and play in masks when their teammates weren't. It doesn't make the decision any easier. I mean,
Susanna.
Thank you. I'm just wondering whether someone can speak to the transmission rates among student athletes, because that was in the newspaper a couple days ago anyway, that student athletes were one of the driving forces of transmission among, you know, I mean, the cases that have been elevated recently and how that's been among the younger population, but that some of that is coming from student sports. And I was just wondering whether that's something to which somebody can speak.
I don't have any stats. I don't know how many of our student athletes have tested positive here at the high school. I can't think of any right now that have tested positive that have not been able to play or practice, other than our team being quarantined for someone else on another team. But there may have been an athlete who's tested positive, but I can't think of one here at Freeport High School.
I can think of a couple at the beginning of the year.
That's right, yep.
But I didn't see that article, unfortunately, and I don't really have any insight on that.
I'm just wondering if they're actually talking about in-school sports being it transmissed within the school sports, or are they talking about club sports? Because I think that would be an important distinction.
Yeah, and I think it was both. I think it went on to, it was one that I skimmed very briefly, but it was talking about the role of sports and as one of the drivers for transmission, and then what can we do to, look at that. But it did mention specifically sports with transmission. So I'm not saying I'm not putting that out as a pro or con for this. I was just curious whether anyone had any insight. So, but thanks for raising that distinction, because that was certainly part of it. Thank you.
So what do you need from us, other than an hour discussion? Do you need anything from us?
I guess I'd love a straw vote. Right now, hearing the board discussion, I'm leaning towards going with Craig's recommendation to follow the CDC guidelines. But, it would be helpful for us to just kind of see. And I know that sometimes some of you like to think more, but it's like we've got games we have to decide on this week. So I apologize. I mean, this all happened this afternoon. And it really was Craig's idea to hey, how about if we talk about it tonight? And I thought that was a great idea.
Okay. So, so we'll do a quick straw vote of we'll word it, those in favor of the recommendation to follow the CDC guidelines.
May I ask one thing? So Becky, if we go, I'm leaning towards giving you what you need, and you have listened to everyone, and you're going in one direction. So I'm happy to support that direction. But I would want to make sure that any communication that goes out to the community saying that we will not require masks, if that is the decision of the majority, makes a very clear distinction between no mask for specific situations, but that it should mean that when students are out gathering, they can feel comfortable without a mask, because I think it could send out the wrong message, like Maddie said, and I think we need to be extremely careful to be very specific about in which situations we endorse students taking their masks off.
Laura?
Not speaking to an endorsement specifically, not that I'm saying I encourage this, but there's no longer a state guideline to wear a mask when you're outside, is there? So we can't, we can still encourage or, not say, but I'm just saying the current guidelines are now that you no longer are required to mask when you're outside. So I'm just sure we're all going to increasingly see students or others in the community outside without masks on. I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. But what I meant is, we know that when students are on the field, they are closer than 6 feet apart. And that's not what the main CDC guidelines say. So make it clear that unless they're 6 feet apart when they're not playing a sport, they need to wear masks. They can take the mask only if they're 6 feet apart, even though on the field they will be 1 foot apart and they are allowed not to have a mask.
Susanna?
Just a question picking up on Volley's point. What is the current regulation for students on campus, not athletes, but if are they still transferring between classes outside? Are we still requiring them to wear masks while they're officially students here?
I feel like that was one of the reasons they at the outside was good, is because they could take their masks off as they were walking around the building. Did I misunderstand that, Jen?
That is, right now, we got new guidance today from the DOE that says that if you're outside and you can maintain the 6 feet apart, then you could take your mask off. So the current discussion that we won't discuss tonight is that we have administrators, as administrators, we're trying to figure out recess, as you can imagine. And we're split at the moment, much like the discussion, I mean, we just found this out today, right? And much like what I did to you guys, I did to the administrators. I just sent out what the DOE gave us, and Will Pidden said, well, so what are you saying? And I said, I don't know what I'm saying. I need people to weigh in because it's tough, right? So, I mean, of course we want the kids to be able to unmask, but then another administrator said, how are we going to police that with little kids, you know, on the playground? So we have not reached a consensus. We don't know what we're going to do about that at the moment, much like this. I think I'm very torn, as I think all of you are, and I also would like to say if we see the data showing something where this is not the right decision, we will be quickly reversing our decision.
Okay. Anybody else have any other questions, comments before we have our quick start? Yes, Lindsay?
Forgive me, we've gone around. I'm not meaning to complicate it. Is there a way to make sure that this is aligned with MPA, that this is right, like what Maddie said? Do we know that? Is that what we're voting on? We know that.
I feel like we know that.
Okay.
That the
Okay.
CDC came out,
Okay.
and what Craig and I had said, it would be nice if they would send it at the same time because of what happened to Craig.
In the fall.
Or no, today.
Oh,
Was
today.
he like sent something out and then it changed
Right.
30 minutes later?
Okay. Okay. So I was just circling back to what Maddie said and making sure we were all on the same page before I raised my hand to vote. Thank you.
Okay, so all those in favor of following the main CDC recommendations? Opposed? Okay, thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Craig and Jen, for staying for that. All right, so now I'm going to continue with my superintendent's report. We're not moving along very fast on the agenda. The equity update. Mid-Atlantic Equity Consortium will be doing a board workshop on May 12th. And so I'm looking forward to that. And the administrative team continued with their book discussion yesterday of how to be an anti-racist. On June 15th, the consultant will be doing some further professional development with the nutrition, community programs, and facilities and transportation staff. And then we are also planning some further professional development with them for school staff on October the 7th. We are also beginning the process of pulling discipline data to send to them for their analysis. And we will also be sending some of our achievement data around socioeconomic, race, and ESL. We did have a DEI committee meeting on April the 12th. One of the things that we became aware of, the Tri-Town Equity Committee will be facilitating a group discussion on the book Uncomfortable Conversations with the Black Man by Emmanuel Ocho on May 5th at 7 p.m. If you're interested in participating in that, you can go to the Facebook page of the Tri-Town Equity Group to get the link. The administrators also from our some of our discussions around the Cultural Competence Institute that we're doing, we've decided that we feel like we need to draft kind of a DEI belief statement. And we also, are working on the curriculum tool to guide our equity work going forward next week across all curriculum areas. And so those are my equity updates for today. Budget update, our next steps is the public hearing will be on May 26th. And we still need to do some postings around the 3 towns, and we'll be doing those in the near future. We have a Q&A tonight, and then another one on the May 12th for any of the public that would like to ask questions on our proposed budget. And then our budget referendum vote will be on June 8th. We are also continuing with teacher negotiations. We met last night and we'll be meeting again in 2 weeks to continue with that. We feel like we're on track, I think, that will be done before the school lets out. Are you hopeful? Yes, Jen's hopeful. And then the highlight of my week so far has been attending and speaking at the 2nd Adult Education Celebration of Learning on Monday evening. We recognized 3 of our 5 recent adult ed learners who received their HiSET, which is, the high school equivalency test. And we also recognized some recent professional certification accomplishments of 2 of our English learners in our new Mainers program. And that concludes my long report for this evening.
That could be the longest superintendent's report on record.
Well, you made some comment at the last board meeting about, I think that was the shortest ever, and so I thought,
So you were using your banked time, I see. Okay. All right, so we are up to the Q&A on the FY22 budget. I don't see a big crowd here in person. Do we have anybody in the Zoom that we think?
We do not.
We do not. Okay. So as Dr. Foley mentioned, there is one more opportunity for Q&A on the budget at our May 12th board meeting. So if folks have questions or comments, feel free to join us at that point. So we will move to 10 on the agenda, administrator reports. We only have one this evening. Rick for finance.
Good evening. I'll be brief. The FY21 budget continues to execute well. With the addition of the employee benefit from the last meeting, I now estimate the undesignated fund balance to be somewhere between $1.3 and $1.6 million. The appropriate documents have been delivered to district communities, and at this time, the FY22 budget approval process continues without any issues. Today, central office administrators were given access to and received training on Infinite Vision's employee self-service. And that concludes on my report for tonight, unless you have any questions.
Are you guys still on track so the goal is a July 1 transition for Infinite Visions, right, for the new fiscal year?
That is correct. And over the next, the office and building administrator training will be, I think, mid-May, May 15th, somewhere around that neighborhood. And then again, in the intervening period between now and June 30th, we'll run more than a couple of practice payrolls, AP functions, just to make sure that they're all on track, that all the settings are in place to have that smooth transition.
Great. Any other questions for Rick? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, board comments and committee reports, board information exchange and agenda requests. Maddie.
After all that sports talk, I thought I'd just share a little arts news. The Freeport High School advanced theater class is doing in-theater performances on Friday and Saturday night for invited guests only. They have 2 short plays that they're doing, and I think they're streaming it as well. I think you can go to the Performing Arts page to see that information, but it's exciting that we'll have live indoor theater again.
Indoor theater. Be slightly warmer than Antigone. Maura.
I had one as well. I'll keep it brief though. I had an opportunity a few weeks ago to attend remotely attend the National School Boards Association conference. And I felt like it really added to some of the same topics that some of us learned about at the Maine School Board Association conference. So I will send around a few presentations from that. There was one about Title IX, there was one about equity. They just sort of were interesting in the different, additional information that I was able to get. So I'll send those around so folks can take a look if you're interested.
Great, thank you. Did you have your hand up, John? No? Okay. I was just looking down the line. Any other info exchange or agenda requests? All right, Finance Committee. Mr. Clough.
Thank you. Had a sort of medium-sized meeting a couple weeks ago for the Finance Committee. Professor Rick donned the tweed jacket with I think it was it cowboy patches on the elbows? Is that what we saw? And Rick's been doing a wonderful job at helping to educate us on all things financial, honestly, really helping us understand some of the basics that go into the creation of the budget, and how he is doing really good work to make it simpler over time, and Infinite Visions will certainly help that as he moves along. So I think they've been very informative meetings for me, even as a alleged banker, to learn some of the ins and outs that Rick's been teaching us, and he's even given us like a book club to study. So we've had some really good meetings with that. And as he talked about the numbers themselves, but everything does look very much on track, and we did discuss the possibility of the bonus before, and definitely agreed with it before it came to the full committee. So thank you.
Any questions for Jeremy? Maddie?
I have no desire to attend the class on this, but I would love the Cliff Notes version of the 3% rule.
As I understand it, Rick, please feel free to run to the podium.
He does not appear to be racing to the podium.
And we're talking about the 3% rule of the capital, not the capital account, but the
undesignated fund
fund balance. That was the word I was looking for. So basically, no more than 3% of our budget is recommended to be kept in that undesignated fund balance. And that is a number that has been suggested, I believe, from the state of Maine through that, but it is certainly fungible depending on situations, and we're not aware of any penalties that have been put out by the state if we went above or below the target.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, technically they have the ability to cut back on our subsidy. If we showed we had $1 billion in our undesignated fund balance, you'd be like, you really don't need the subsidy from the state then. So we have never seen in our time on the board or Rick's time as a finance director, the state ever doing that to any of the districts, but it's sort of a tool they have in their toolbox if they ever wanted to exert leverage, I guess.
But I can say with extreme confidence that Becky and Rick probably talk about this daily, and it's something that's always on Becky's mind in terms of not dipping too much into that. Also, yeah, because it does provide a level of security over time. If things happen that we don't foresee.
If you have more than that on a regular basis, the thought behind it is you're really overtaxing the taxpayer.
So the two numbers Becky will tell you she always knows is how many kids we have and what's in our undesignated fund balance. Those are the two numbers she always has available. All right. So strategic communications.
Okay. We met on April 9th, and one of the things we did was we looked at the student exit surveys and discussed how we might want to revise that data collection. And one of the things that we changed was that we would begin looking at collecting data about grade level. We'd get grade level data, which Ginny has already started to do in this October 1st collection. And we looked at the information and data about the migration of students, and Becky's going to talk a little bit about that. And we also discussed how to best communicate when there's a highly charged, highly controversial issue. And the suggestion is that with future communications like that, when possible, Becky will provide a copy of her written communications to Strategic Communication Committee members for feedback. And that's basically it.
And I'm going to just talk a little bit about the migration of the students. In your item 11C on yellow paper is where we have compiled the results from the last couple of years. And I first want to just have you turn to page 5 of that packet, because Jenny picked up on an error that we had made in the chart. On the last page, that should say survey responses for 2017-18 instead of 2020. And then I just want to do a brief overview. In 2018-19, we sent out 117 surveys of families that left the district during that year, and we received 24 of the surveys back, which is about 21% of the survey sent out. During that year, most of the results cited that it was for non-educational reasons that they were leaving. 11 cited educational reasons, and of those 11, the area that rose to the top was most of those cited a lack of rigor in programming for the reasons that they were exiting the district. In 2019-2020, we sent out 137 surveys, and we received 54 responses, which was a 39% return of the survey sent out. And this time, most cited educational reasons for leaving. That was 32 of the people who responded. 21 cited non-educational reasons. And the most common reason cited was because of issues related to COVID or the hybrid model. The other points I just wanted to talk about is that on the sheet that shows you all of the different numbers, I did a comparison of the past 2 years, and the number of homeschool students increased by 89 this year. Now, some of those attended a private school last year. It doesn't mean we lost 89 of the kids that were attending RSU 5 schools. The Waldorf school enrollment was reduced by 40 of our RSU 5 families no longer going there. And then the Baxter Academy enrollment also was reduced by 8. And then the rest of them were just like, 1 or 2. So those are the 3 major ones where there was a shift. I also took time today at some point to just look at the 5-year comparison, which is on page, where is that 5-year comparison? On page 1. And really the total number of students that are exiting have been really pretty steady until this year. We've been at like 17%, then it was 16% for the past 2 years, and then this year it jumped to 18%, and I have to believe that that's probably due to COVID. And that kind of concludes my overview. Thank you.
Can I ask a question about, and this is sort of ties back in with the presentation at the beginning from the enrollment study. I was a little confused why it said like private, non-parochial or I don't know. But the number it had on here was 80. And to me, that was pretty much all the private schools is way more than 80. So am I reading the information wrong?
I think I had the answer to that at one point, and I'm not sure I can remember it. It's not everyone.
It's on page 7 of her presentation. So it
Yeah,
says,
we gave her that data.
okay.
So but it's not everything that's listed on here. And I'm sure Jenny's at home saying, oh, don't you remember? But I will remember tomorrow with her help, and then I'll put it in a board update.
Okay, thanks. Maura.
Thanks, Becky and Strategic Communications team. I just had a question for all of you about the response rate for that survey. I was wondering your thoughts on, I guess, how to increase it, and if you think it's a concern that the rate is low, that, you know, we're not getting an idea from a lot of the families who are leaving the district what the reason is. Thanks.
I think for a survey, 21 and 39% is not bad. So,
I also wanted.
I guess that's what I would say to that. I don't know. I think it's anonymous, so I think once she sends it out, there are things that we ask about, like what school and stuff, but I don't know that we could rehound the same people who aren't returning it.
But one thing that I wanted to add is that for kids who have parents who live in separate homes, one kid may be leaving, but 2 surveys are sent out. One to the mother, one to the father, one to each guardian. So in the future, we will make a reference of how many students are actually leaving and how many surveys are being sent out. But this number may be deceivingly low because maybe we send out 2 surveys, one to each parent, and the parents decided only one will return it for that one student.
I was thinking it was pretty good. You guys almost doubled your response rate in a year.
No, I was going to say exactly the same thing, and also that gets into the further notation about why students left. If it's referencing lack of rigor, or if it's referencing non-academic reasons, that can come from, they can have multiple responses for the same student. So, but yeah, same comment as well there.
So do we just say, like, is this open-ended questions? Or, and then you guys, no, it's like, check a box. Why are you leaving? Okay. So focus on equity is one of the boxes that people can check?
I think they can also do comments.
Okay.
And so we look at that, so it's a combination.
And so that is, like, our focusing on it was the reason they left? Or they left because of our previous lack of focus on it?
No.
Do we know?
Yes, on that one, they're not liking that we're focusing on it.
Okay.
And it was a comment.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on this? I know this is a lot of work that Ginny pulls together for this data, so thanks, Ginny. And thank you for the committee for dissecting it and boiling it down for us. All right, now we're moving along. Yes?
Sorry, I do have a general comment. I feel badly Ginny did all that work and I'm not asking questions, because I remember asking a lot of questions about this like 3 years ago, I think, when we didn't have, you know, much information at all. So I'm grateful that we're looking at this. Thank you for the scrutiny of it, and it's good information. If there's my general takeaway from the presentation earlier in this is that things are pretty steady state, and even though I sort of anecdotally have alarm bells go off because it seems like all the young kids in my neighborhood don't go to public schooling, that doesn't signify any large fluctuations. So you're nodding at me, so that's a valid vantage point, perspective then? Okay, good to know, thank you.
All right, policy. Back to Candy.
Yes. And as you'll see when Cynthia comes up to talk to you, that we've actually met twice since we reported out. And we're bringing two policies for second read, that general gender-neutral language and tobacco use and possession. And we've changed both of the titles of those policies, you'll see, as Cynthia talks to you about them. And then there are 4 that are here for first read tonight. One of them, the earned paid leave, is brand new as a result of some legislation from the state. And the only other thing I would say is in the policies and procedures about expulsion guidelines, there was quite a discussion, which she'll tell you about, having to do with if someone had a conflict of interest and where we go from there. So Cynthia will talk to you about those things.
Good evening. Do you want to start with a motion or for the second read ones?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
So do we have a motion for consideration and approval of the following policies? Second read, ACA. Shouldn't it be what we're changing it to?
Oh.
The names?
That's interesting. Yeah.
Okay, so ACA would be respectful language.
Right.
And ADC, tobacco-free schools, use and possession of tobacco and electronic smoking devices. That just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? Thank you, Susanna. Do we have a second?
Of Susanna.
Lindsay?
Thank you. Okay. I'm just writing that down because I'm also taking minutes. So. Okay, so there were no changes to ACA, but there were changes to ADC when we met. As Candy said, we met twice, and so when we met again, and the change was highlighted in yellow. So if you want to go to page 2. And remember, there were 2, I brought the old one. Originally there were 2 different sentences there, and they seemed very confused. Originally it said, the superintendent or the designee reserves the right to refer students to law enforcement agency on a case-by-case basis as they may deem necessary. And then the second sentence was, however, and then what is still here in yellow. So as we talked, we were like, well, if we just remove that first sentence and just keep that second part, that kind of covers the whole base on there. And then we should remove those quotes. There are quotes around that. We'll remove those. So I just wanted to add that too. They don't need to be there. Let's see if there's anything else on this. Oh, and then if you go to page 3, so there's quotation marks where it says where it's education on the bottom. Under that section, it says age appropriate tobacco vaping. That's in quotes. And so I got an email asking about that today. And so I think what they did, this is the sample, because if you remember correctly, they redid the whole policy. I think they put it in quotes for emphasis. You know, sometimes there's different reasons to put something in quotes. I'm wondering if we do need them, because I think right now people understand what vaping is, and maybe they wanted to be clear on that, and it's up to you whether you think they should be there or not, but I'm not sure we need those. And then in the same paragraph at the end, that vape free. So that's for, my recommendation is to take them out. And the only other place we have quotes prior to this is where we define things, and that feels appropriate to leave those there. So those are the only things I have to add for second read policies tonight.
If I recall, the change we were looking for, I feel like what it said before was shall, and we wanted it to be may, right?
Yes, and it does say may now.
Yeah, it does, right.
Yeah.
But
thank you for pointing that out, yes.
Because that's what I remember was, like, we didn't want to make it like
Yes.
you have to hand them over to law
Yes.
enforcement. Okay. Personally, I don't really care about the quotes if you don't think they need to be there.
Okay.
Leave those in your quality grammatical hands. Jeremy?
Okay.
Full disclosure, I can't believe I'm asking this, but in the highlighted section on page 2, should there be a comma after dispensing? Just so you don't get an Oxford comma debate and end up in
I
court.
think that's probably debatable, but I would, if I were writing it and before and, I usually put, if there's a list, I put it there too, so. Suspected of selling, dispensing, or distributing. Oh, yes, it goes with the rest, so no. Thank you. So the or, so it would be, oh, is that the second or you're talking about?
After dispensing.
Oh, yeah, no, it wouldn't go there. If you were going to put one, you would put it after products, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
In the list, because that goes together as a phrase. Because it's dispensing or distributing tobacco products.
Well, it's selling, dispensing, or distributing tobacco
Yes.
products.
It's just whether we want to have an Oxford comma or not.
I don't even know what an Oxford comma is, so I really have no horse in this game.
I can tell you that Oxford commas are not appropriate Oxford protocol right now.
Oh, well,
So
there.
they got rid of them. But it, yeah.
Okay, so you'll leave it up to me. Okay.
Jen?
I have a huge pet peeve when people use quotations inappropriately, so I think we need to get those out.
Oh, yes, I said that. We're taking those out.
Okay.
Yes.
It's like a crazy wildfire thing right now where people
Yeah.
put quotes over everything.
Yeah.
It's totally grammatically
And
incorrect.
honestly, I'm not even sure why they're there, because they weren't there in the original, and maybe it was just maybe I put them there this time to focus you in there, but then I highlighted it yellow, so I double focused on it. So they don't belong, so those will come out for sure.
So no comma, no quotes.
Correct.
There we go. Any other comments? Okay. All right, so we have a motion and we have a second. If there's no other discussion or questions on this one, we'll take a vote on the second read policies. All those in favor? Opposed? No. Great.
And one other thing I forgot to mention on that last policy is you had asked, what to have the administrative team, weigh in on, because they're going to have to be the enforcers of this, and they were totally supportive of it. So.
Great.
All right. So we have a motion that you want to do for the next one, for first read?
So do we have a motion for consideration and approval to the following policies? First read, GBP, earned paid leave, JICC, student conduct on school buses, JKE, expulsion of students, and JKE-R, expulsion guidelines. Maddie and Vali, thank you.
Okay. So as Candy mentioned in her report, this new policy is earned paid leave, and it's basically based in law requirement. And so if you have any questions about that, Rick is here to answer that. We do have, this makes a reference in the last paragraph to administrative procedures, and we do have those in place, but those are going to be in procedures section. And so that's actually much more detailed than the actual policy. So, okay.
Vali.
Oh, sorry. Are you ready for questions?
Do you want to take each policy separately? Yes, we can do that.
No. I have a question about the last one.
Oh, okay. I'll continue if you don't mind. And then, so JICC, so we made some changes to what we've been doing with all policies, parents/guardians, and then changing the he, she's, and so forth. So basically on that particular policy, there's no substantial change except for we added that when the privileges are suspended for bus, that they're in consultation with the director of transportation, which they're already doing that. So it's just putting into the policy what we're doing. And then the last sentence we added is the principal may put a plan in place with the parent/guardians to ensure the child's successful return to the bus. So if they're off the bus for a serious reason, you know, they're not going to have a plan every time. There might be just a small incident, but if there's something substantial, that there be a plan in place for this success so it doesn't happen again. Any questions on that particular one? Okay.
I thought it was interesting, some of the language that was in there before, like the cooperation in checking the child's behavior.
Yes.
Whoa.
Yeah. Instead of correcting, yeah.
Mara.
Thanks, Cynthia. I was wondering about the last piece here about the parent or guardian being responsible for seeing their kids get to school. And I
Yes.
know that, I know our principals aren't here tonight, but I was just wondering if that ever is an issue or a burden with parents who might not have access to transportation or can't otherwise, because they're scheduled, transport a child, like if we make alternate arrangements to try to, like the van, or I don't know. I understand if it's a behavioral issue or concern that creates a challenge, but.
Yeah, and I really don't have the information to share with you. I don't know, Becky, if you've.
Well, I will tell you that we do, for our students with disabilities, if they're
Right.
struggling, we do have, I don't know if Rick remembers how many vans we have, but we have a lot of vans running. I think we have at least 7 now. So we do provide, when needed, for students with disabilities. But I think, Mara, your question is more around just the equity, right? If somebody really can't. But it would, I think it's used very sparingly, right, as a last resort if they're just
Right.
not being safe. So that's why I think they added the line about the plan, because there's a lot that we can teach into. I think some of our principals have ridden the bus before to help with that. And so with the modeling or spoken to the kids. And so we really, I think if we had a family that was really struggling, we definitely would be trying to work with them.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, and the next policy is expulsion of students, and it's also paired with the policy after that, which is the procedures for expulsion of students. And so this one, we spent a lot of time talking about, because this was one that went to MAAC, and we got some feedback, and so we absolutely went through and addressed those concerns to make sure that these are much more equitable. And you can see in the first, on page 1 of 2, JKE, section B, that language, just adding that language of providing written notice in the parent's first language, and then also adding by email. Those were 2 suggestions right from MAAC.
Can I ask why some stuff is, because everything underlined is new, right? Why is some stuff underlined and some stuff underlined and highlighted?
That one, I think I highlighted that because it was directly from MAAC. Let's
Okay,
see.
so the highlighted stuff is the MAAC
Yeah,
recommendations?
directly from
Okay.
MAAC on this particular policy, yes. Yeah. And then at the bottom, one of the other things that we had, some of them were direct changes that they put in. Other things were just kind of comments and questions to consider. And so those we went through and discussed, and that's how we ended up at the bottom of this page, the expulsion hearing. Making sure that we're always being mindful, or the board's being mindful in an expulsion hearing, of that non-discrimination policy. So to call attention to that all the way through the process, and it's also reflected in the next policy, which is the procedures, that all the way through that process, that you know, you're going to have that policy right out there, and that you're always mindful of the race or gender and all, et cetera. And so that was directly an addition from our discussion of that comment. And then can I do the other one? Those 2 kind of go together, if you don't mind, Valerie. I'm not sure which one you have the question on. So on the next JKE-R, the administrative procedures, there really are administrative procedures. So on the title, the guidelines is crossed out, and it says now administrative procedures. So we added under the procedures for the conduct of the board hearing to expel, we added that sentence again here on the procedures. That would be the first thing, the first step out of those 4. And then on number 4, we added when applicable, an interpreter will be provided for, and I'm going to change that to ELL students because we call them English language learners instead of just the EL students. That was a direct one from MAAC as well.
Since we don't reference like if somebody didn't go back to the beginning of the policies and see that, like, should we just, I always hate to put in acronyms.
Oh, the actual.
When we haven't said what it stands for.
I'm gonna see. Is it any? It's not anywhere else. Yes.
I didn't
Well,
see it,
I'll
but-
I'll go ahead and extend that out.
I mean, if we have it in there, fine, because I'm all about saving space once we've.
No, I'll
acknowledged
change it. I think that makes sense. If it's not there once, then we should put that in. Thank you. All right, and then let's see on the next page, those are self-explanatory. And then section E, this is where we as a committee decided we would bring this is why it's in red, because we want to bring this topic up for the board to discuss. And so this is when, if you are in or going into an expulsion hearing and there's like a conflict of interest, or your child may be a good friend of that student, or so forth. You could be related, et cetera, et cetera. And so what do you do in that case? So it just says the hearing officer will ask any member of the board if they find themselves in a possible conflict of interest situation because they know the student or parents or guardians to such an extent, or have knowledge of the facts to such an extent that they could not impartially hear the facts and decide the issues on its merits. So this next sentence is, this is our draft. In such cases, the board member should recuse themselves from the hearing entirely. And then this is the discussion point, adding, or from participating in the deliberations and voting, but remain present for the hearing. So we wanted to put that out for the board discussion to see what the feeling is on that.
Polly.
So Cynthia, in that sentence in red,
yes,
is the fact that the second half of the sentence is in parentheses mean that that's not the option that?
I think it's one or the other, right? Those are
Right,
two
so why do we
options.
have parentheses?
So why I put that there, I mean, and this is coming out, and it'll just be written in the proper way. So when we were meeting as a committee, initially, we only had up to entirely, and then I think during the meeting I might have added that. I don't know if you can remember, Lindsay or Maddie, but it's not about having it in parentheses. It was just that separating the two parts so that those are the considerations.
Okay, but they're equally viable as choices, so a
Yes.
board member could consider either. Okay.
Yes, you can keep the whole thing, and we'll take out the parentheses or reword it in a better way if it doesn't sound, like it works.
Okay.
Why would you have both, though, would you? Maddie, yeah.
So I think we didn't know how the board would feel about that. If the board feels strongly that a board member has any connection whatsoever to a child that we're having an expulsion hearing for, that the board member should recuse themselves, then we would not have that second part of the sentence. But we started this conversation in the meeting, and then we continued the conversation in email.
Yes.
And we were on the Google Doc and making suggestions. And so it was sort of like, well, let's see what the board feels about this, because maybe it's important for the board members to all be there. And it's tough to say. It depends on the situation.
So
Candy.
Yeah, following what Maddie said, the discussion, really when it came down to putting in this or in, was that the feeling that board members, it still might be important just for board members to know what's going on, even though they wouldn't take part in discussion or vote. That's where that came from.
Jen.
So I'm wondering, what did it say before? Because they'll just ask and then it's knowledge? So the officer will ask any member, but then there was no other language that said what you're gonna do with that information?
We added that because we're like, what's the point of that? So?
Oh, okay, so E just existed as an ask? Correct. Yeah. That's weird.
Yes.
Okay.
We wanted to clarify it.
So now we know everyone's biased because we asked, and now we're going to let you all vote.
I mean, I think could be either, because couldn't it be up to a board member? You know, if it was me, in a situation, I might say, you know what, I just don't want to be a part of it at all. But if it was Maddie, she might say, well, I would like to be there but not participate. So can we cannot have both options?
Yes, the idea was just to take out those parentheses.
Yeah.
And you could have both options.
Okay, I think both options are good.
I guess I feel like when you recuse yourself, I mean, you'd have to recuse, if you had a conflict of interest, right, because we have a conflict of interest policy, you'd have to recuse yourself from deliberating and voting anyway, right? So, you know, all of our other conflict of interest, we don't kick them out of the meeting. They can stay. But we never force somebody to stay in a meeting anyway. So if you felt like you wanted to leave, you could. If you have both of them in there, like, who decides? Like, maybe maybe I feel like it's inappropriate for Maddie to stay to this. I think she should leave completely, but she thinks she should get to stay. Like, if we're trying to say this is how we're going to do it in our policy, I think we should say we're allowing people to stay. They just can't deliberate or vote. Or once you have a conflict of interest, you need to be gone completely. I think having both options in there is very vague. I mean, it's no better than what it said before, really, although it says you can't vote. Vali.
Although it says here that the board member should recuse themselves or from hearing entirely or from participating. I mean, I would phrase it and say in such cases the board member should either recuse themselves from the hearing entirely or recuse themselves from participating in deliberations. But it does say who makes the decision. It's the board member who has a conflict of interest who makes the decision.
Right, so basically they could stay. They could always stay unless they chose to leave. Okay, I guess that's fine, but Mara.
So I want to just preface this by saying I completely trust everyone's professionalism on this board, and I know that what happens in an executive session, I feel like this is like Vegas, what happens in the executive session stays in the executive session, but that would be my only concern about this, that if someone has a conflict of interest, then they're participating in an executive session and potentially decision-making, but also an executive session that they're then not supposed to go and talk to with the person they're close to about. So again, I totally trust everyone's ability to do that, but in setting policy, I think we have to keep in mind not only the current board, but future boards. And I just would be remiss if I didn't bring up that I have a little bit of discomfort around that part of it, that if you have a conflict of interest, you're participating in a meeting that's supposed to be closed door and then also potentially making a vote. And I don't know, I think that's all I have to say about that.
I think, unfortunately, I think there's a lot of cases. I mean, you know, we have a lot of teachers, right, that work in our district. And if there were ever personnel issues that came to us, I think we would be sort of in that same rock and a hard place kind of spot, right? Like, you know, they could be your, best friend, next door neighbor, who knows? So yeah, I mean, I'm thinking, even directly related, right? I mean, if we had an expulsion for a physical altercation, and I mean, what if it was one of the kids, our kids on, somebody on the board? I mean, that would be even more personal and, but hopefully maybe in that type of situation, that board member would choose to recuse themselves completely. But I haven't looked this way in a while. What do you guys got over here? Beth.
I guess, I see what Maura's saying, definitely, but I think that there's a point where we have to kind of give over the trust, the, policy as best we can, but I think that we do a lot of things on trust as far as executive session is confidential and, so again, I guess I would be fine with the doing the both, both things there, and trusting, you just have to, I guess, trust that the board members will do the right thing at that point.
Becky?
I think this is a little bit trickier. So just my 2 cents, I think I would have them recuse themselves from the hearing entirely. Because I think when it comes to expulsion, and we've only had one in my 5 years here, but if that, there was a lot of deliberation around that, and I feel like if that were one of your children, it would just make the discussion that's taking place, that has to be really honest and courageous. I think it would make it harder. And I think when you're writing policy, you want to think about what we're writing before we get ourselves into that situation.
Susanna?
I'm just wondering, apart from being present, what is there to the person who would be recusing themselves from participating in the deliberation and debate and voting, if they were there, are they a fly on the wall, so to speak, or are they participating in some other aspect? If they're sitting there listening to everything, I'm not certain what the relevance is, apart from, I guess, knowing on what's going on, but I'm not certain what the relevance is for them to be there to begin with. So just like some clarification on that.
I'm going to look to the folks who wrote the policy.
I think that the discussion was just for board members who couldn't take part in discussion or vote, but it might be important just for them just to know what's going on. That was really where the discussion went.
Jen?
So Becky just brought up a very good point that I had not thought of, but having been on the board when we went through the expulsion, I think the point about the rest of the board being able to speak freely is huge, because I'm putting myself back there and thinking, if that was a situation where that was a friend's child, I would absolutely not feel comfortable if I knew that was Lindsay's neighbor's kid. I would not feel comfortable freely speaking in the way that, as you said, you have to be very honest in those deliberations. So I now would go to say that I would say recuse entirely. I don't know how you decide how much of a conflict that you have to have.
That was my question when I read it, was like, if I know the kid, is that a conflict of interest?
Yeah.
Like, what's is it, if the kid is slept over at my house, that's the, it's hard. We're not a huge school. The likelihood is we're going to know these people.
Maybe that's why the sentence was ended.
Yeah.
We just ask.
Yeah. Beth, sorry.
That's okay.
I was looking at you.
Yeah, and I absolutely understand Becky's point. But again, that's the question I have too, because obviously if it was my own child, I would never want to sit here and have you guys, listen to everything that you would discuss about my child getting, or something like that, but if it's just, somebody, oh yeah, that person went to school, I don't know, yeah, where does the definition lie in conflict of interest, I guess?
Maddie?
We have to be careful. We can't define everything in policy. We would not have enough policies. That's why it's a weird sentence that the fragments end to such an extent, because there's got to be judgment in there. I would hope if any of us found ourselves in a situation like this, we would, if I did, I would call Michelle and Becky. I'd have a conversation ahead of time. I'd be like, I don't know, what do you think? I'd hem and haw, and then I'd make a decision. I think, my preference is to go with Becky's recommendation because, well, first of all, if it was one of our kids, there is a parent in the room, and I would probably send my husband, so I wouldn't have to hear you talking about it. But if it was my kid's best friend, it's not just conflict of interest, it's privacy from their perspective. And if my kid's best friend and their parent saw me in the room, that would feel terrible. So I know it's not as clear as we might want it to be, but we can't, because every situation is going to be different.
So I think the concept of having them recuse themselves entirely is, very concrete and specific, but we keep the sort of intentional vagueness around the extent of a conflict, right? So there's some room there, some gray area to determine the situation. Bali?
Yeah, and to that effect, I would just strike from the first sentence where it says, because they know the student to such an extent that they have knowledge of facts or whatever it is. Maybe you should just say, in a possible conflict of interest situation, that they could not impartially hear the facts without even giving a couple of examples, because there may be other situations where they cannot be impartial, but they're not listed here. So it creates a lot of confusion. So I think what the definition should be broad, but it should be clear that if you cannot be impartial, then you need to recuse yourself, without saying in what specific situations you may not be able to be impartial.
Yeah, I mean, because in theory, if you were physically there, that would be knowledge of the facts. I mean, it doesn't mean you have a conflict. You just happen to see whatever may have happened, right? So I like that idea of sort of the conflict and, leave it at the inability to impartially hear the facts. So is that what we're hearing? So sort of possible conflict of interest, that they could not impartially hear the facts and decide the issues on its merits. In such case, the board member should recuse themselves from the hearing entirely.
Is that what you're looking at? Okay. And I think what we can do is we'll rediscuss this next Friday at our meeting, just to make sure we've got the language at the top, so that when it comes to second read, okay? And there's no other than K, there's just a big gap there, and I think that's just it was a return issue, so that'll get taken care of. But that's it.
Was that your question, Vali, that you had on that one earlier? Okay. Any other? Oh, Angela.
Sorry, about the reentry plan guidelines, and I just feel like expulsion, like suspension, this is an opportunity for education.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wonder about that. I know it's a policy, so it's going to be broad, but some kind of focus on rehabilitating, seems like a good way to talk about reentry. Something like along the lines of restorative justice, where you focus on reconciliation, with the community, with the students that maybe were affected by it, it just, because I do think that a lot of harm comes from expulsion and suspension in a lot of cases.
And that's the way they write those plans at the moment. It doesn't say it in the policy, but that's definitely the focus. Yeah.
No, thank you.
Maddie?
Sorry, Angela, I just want to be clear. Are you suggesting we add something under 4 reentry plan guidelines, add a letter that talks about a restorative justice or rehabilitation plan aspect? Something that just puts into writing what the practice is?
Yes, I think something a little more specific about educating, and something along those lines.
I don't think we should use restorative justice, because
No.
that's kind of a...
No, that's it. Yeah, that's not a term for this, but that's the idea behind it, that you're actually trying to rehabilitate and educate. I mean, it's an opportunity for that.
I'm just looking to Becky as the writer of those plans. How you feel about that, and if so, what it might read?
I think we'd have to talk about the wording, but I don't have a problem with the concept. We always do that. Well, we did it in the one case we've had. There was a lot of counseling and different things that were done. And I agree with Jen. I wouldn't want to use a term like restorative justice, because, I think some would argue that there's a pure definition of that phrase versus a more general one. So I would just want to think about how we'd want to write it and bring it back to you. But in concept,
Yeah, that was
totally
just an
agree with
analogy,
you.
not using it.
Maddie?
And I'm thinking, actually, we probably could just use some of that language and insert it in A or in D, just about rehabilitation and reeducation, just to make it clear that that's the intention. And I think that'll get to the spirit of what you're talking about. Okay.
Great. Other questions or comments on these first reads? So just a reminder, first reads will be back for a final vote and second read. But in the meantime, are we ready for a vote on that one? Seeing no hands up. All right, so we already have the motion and the second, so all of those in favor? None opposed. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so we have no unfinished business, new business. We got rid of a couple of those early on. And so 14C, consideration and approval of an arts education resolution.
Yes, you'll see that in your packet, and this came about, as you know, I'm serving, I think Maddie had mentioned, on kind of a state level music committee, specific to, the challenges that they've been having with COVID. And I've really been surprised by the stories that I've heard on that committee about some districts in the state, kind of cutting back or cutting out some of their music and art programs and having those teachers teach other subjects. I don't think the same problem really exists in sports or even extracurriculars, because those are largely stipend positions. And I think that with this coming year, with the current CDC guidelines, I think we're still going to struggle with some of the same things we have been struggling with this year around staffing. And so this resolution really just is saying that, we are committed as a board, and I as the superintendent, to continue with our performing arts program. And if you agree with this and make a motion for me to kind of go forward with it, what I would do would be to send it and share it with the governor and the commissioner and other groups where I think could impact, to send the message that, we know there are struggles during COVID, but the way to find solutions is not to, cut back on the performing arts program.
Maddie?
There's a little typo. There's just, we need a space before the second whereas. And then I just wanted, if people want to know more about this, because Becky asked me and I forgot. I had to go back and find it this morning. There is a national effort to ask school boards to pass these resolutions. And if you want to know more about it, you can go to Education at artsareeducation.org and read more about it. But Becky didn't bat an eye when I asked, which I appreciate. So of course I'm in support.
Any other thoughts, questions? Yeah, Jen.
I think it's great, and I fully support it. I think it's a shame when you hear about, these things being taken. I mean, I don't think it's happening as much in our area, but I mean, this is for the whole state, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's very important.
Susanna?
I'm also really happy to see this, and I think not just, I know we've had the conversations about arts versus the sports, but also against the STEM, where we tend to leave art out of sort of that focus, and there is sort of a push in schools on looking at more of the engineering and the maths and the sciences, and art is so critical to being able to understand any of that. And so just really seeing this, I'm really happy, so thank you.
All right, so do I have a motion and for consideration and approval of the arts education resolution? Look at all the, I've never had everybody put their hand up. Pick somebody, Cynthia. Candy. And a second from anyone else. Angela. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? I too agree that I think this is, I mean, you know, I don't know if it changes moves any huge mountains, but I think it, you know, puts our stake in the sand that this is important to us, and, you know, we're gonna figure out a way to make it available, even if it's not quite exactly what it always was, given COVID, but I appreciate the effort. Valerie.
I agree, and since it's so critical for the effectiveness of this vote to go farther to distribute it amongst other districts, I'm wondering if Maura can help out. Yeah?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have an MSBA meeting coming up in a couple weeks. I'd be happy to share it at that. And
Oh, that's a great idea.
Perfect, good idea, thank you. All right, all those in favor? None opposed? Thank you. All right, personnel.
Okay, we're getting there, folks. All right, the 7-8 math teacher. I'm happy to recommend Emily Rosawan as the 7-8 math teacher at DCS. Emily has a bachelor from Clemson University and a master's from Boston University. And I love this comment from one of her references. Emily constantly innovates to provide her scholars with the highest level of instruction at every minute of every day. In her classroom, every minute counts, and she moves across and up the aisles to ensure that every scholar gets frequent, targeted feedback on the day's objective. We're delighted to welcome Emily to DCS.
I love that they refer to their students as scholars.
I know, I do too.
Like, just hearing that about yourself must make you feel like, yeah, a scholar. All right, so do I have a motion for consideration and approval to employ a 7-8 math, grade math teacher at the Durham Community School for the 2021-2022 school year? Vali, Maddie, any questions, comments? All those in favor? Great, none opposed.
Next, we have the technology integrator teacher at Freeport High School, and I'm delighted to recommend Alexander Toole as this teacher at FHS. He comes with us with a bachelor's from Dickinson College and a master's from Johns Hopkins. He has 7 years of experience, and one of his references said he is constantly in teachers' classrooms to support their development in the areas of classroom culture, rigor, and ratio. In the classroom, there is a tangible feeling in the space from the consistent and natural way that students look at one another when they speak, to the quickness with which they start in on a task when given a direction. Students have internalized what is needed to be academically successful. We are delighted to welcome Alex to FHS. This was a position we were unable to fill this year in this way, so we just feel like this is going to be a great fit for next year.
Do you have a motion written, or you want me to just sort of wing it?
Yeah, no, I did when, yes, I do have a motion. But not written down.
I'll figure it out. So do I have a motion for consideration and approval to employ a technology integrator at Freeport High School for the 2021-2022 school year?
You did a good job.
Thank you. Susanna, thanks. Beth, second. Any questions? Jen?
So just in looking at the number of candidates who apply to the other two positions versus this one, what are the requirements to be an instructional coach technology integrator? Like, what are is it a certificate, or is it just?
So, you know, I'm not sure that, I think what's happened in this situation is that as we have received applicants over the past year, you know, Jen has looked at them as they've come in. And so it's kind of been like a rolling kind of thing. But basically, there's not a specific certification for this. So we really are looking with the teacher with experience with leadership skills.
Vali?
So Becky, when you said that this is a technology integrator and then somebody mentioned teacher, this person will not be doing classroom work, right?
Not where they have a classroom assigned with them, but they'll be probably co-teaching with the teacher.
Right, as they coach the teacher but
Yes.
not teach the students, okay.
Very similar to like the literacy specialist or the math specialist, but, and this particular person at the high school, they help facilitate all of the PLC meetings with the different departments.
Maddie?
So Lisa Hogan's loss was felt hugely by the high school staff and all who knew her. So, and I know that that's been some of the difficulty in replacing. So, the skills that this person's brings, I'm assuming from the quote you read, are similar. Will they also be providing the coaching for the teachers? It's excellent news. Great, thanks.
I think this school in Massachusetts is going to really start disliking our district. But hey, their loss is our gain. So we have a motion and we have a second. Any other questions, comments? All right, so all those in favor? Great, none opposed.
The interesting thing, the person that was hired at Durham, the teacher that resigned came from that school. And so, yeah, and so we'll, and there's so much alignment that I think it's amazing that Will didn't scare the teacher away, because he said something like, well, if it keeps aligning like this, in 6 years you'll have 2 kids. So anyway, but she's still coming, so I'm all excited. Shows she has courage if she can come after that. And then my last recommendation is for the classroom teacher at Moore Street, and I'm thrilled to recommend Jana Glenn as a classroom teacher at MSS. She comes to us with a bachelor from College Mount St. Vincent and a master's in literacy. She has 7 years of experience, and most recently at PS 234 in New York City. And one of her references states, from the beginning of the year, the children quickly become a cohesive community, navigating the classroom with independence and confidence. Her classroom is filled with joy and rigor. And we are excited to welcome Jana to MSS. And we don't know at this moment the specific grade. It will be probably either kindergarten or 2nd grade that she will be teaching. And it will depend on the next round of interviews. And Jana is very happy to teach either of those grades.
Adaptability is one good thing we want around here, so good. All right, so do I have a motion for consideration and approval to hire a teacher at Moore Street School for the 2021-2022 school year? Susanna and Jeremy, thank you. Any questions? All right, all those in favor? None opposed. Great. Thank you. All right, so we are back to our third public comment of the agenda. We'll do a quick check of Zoom, see if we have any. Nope.
We do not.
No late arrivals. All right, well then I would take a motion to adjourn. Vali, Mara, thank you. All those in favor? Great. Thanks. Oh, quick reminder. Ginny loves me. You guys, I harassed her about her big sticky note. I don't know if you guys can see this. It's the smallest font I think that's printable on a printer. It's just to remind everybody about the superintendent evaluations. They have to be completed prior to Monday morning when Ginny arrives, and she arrives at like 6 a.m. So So Sunday night, call it Sunday night, to get those in. So I appreciate everybody's effort to get that taken care of this
And
week.
when you start it, you have to finish it because
Yes.
I didn't finish it and now I have to redo it. But that's okay. I love doing it.
I was going to say, it does say it in the memo.
If it's not in the first line of an
You miss it,
email,
yeah. I hear you. All right, thank you, guys.